For most of human history, falling asleep alone would have been unusual. Long before bedrooms, walls, or even permanent houses, people often rested close to others, family members, children, elders, sometimes within the warmth and quiet sounds of the same shared space. In the modern world, sleep is usually private, silent, and separated. But the deeper history of our species suggests that rest once happened inside the group itself. If that long past shaped the way the human body learned to sleep, a quiet question begins to appear. Why did so much of human history involve sleeping together in the same place? Why did 90% of human history sleep in groups? Night, for most of human history, arrived without warning and without protection. There were no electric lights slowly dimming in a quiet room, no walls sealing out the outside world, and no door separating a sleeping person from the sounds of the dark. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, the landscape changed in a way that modern people rarely experience. Vision became limited, shadows grew deeper, and the familiar paths and trees of daytime became uncertain shapes. For early humans, this shift was not simply a change in lighting. It was a change in how safe the world felt. In daylight, people could see across the landscape, recognize movement, and respond quickly to danger. But once darkness spread across the ground, human senses were no longer the strongest in the environment. Many animals that shared the same landscapes were more comfortable in the dark. Some had sharper hearing, others could see better at night, and some moved quietly in ways humans could not easily detect. In that kind of world, the moment of sleep was not only a biological necessity, it was also a vulnerable moment. A sleeping body cannot watch the horizon, cannot listen carefully to every sound, and cannot react instantly to movement nearby. Even in modern environments, sleep involves a small surrender of awareness. In the deep past, that surrender happened in open landscapes where the boundaries between human space and the rest of nature were often thin. Archaeological evidence and observations of traditional hunter-gatherer societies suggest that early human groups usually lived in small communities made up of relatives and long-term companions. These groups were not large cities or permanent villages. They were flexible bands of people who moved across landscapes while gathering plants, hunting animals, and following seasonal changes. During the day, these groups worked together, shared food, and stayed close enough to cooperate. When evening arrived, it would have been natural for that same group to remain together. The places where people rested were often temporary shelters, open camps, or the protected areas of caves and rock overhangs. Such spaces rarely provided separate rooms or individual sleeping areas. Instead, they created a shared space where several members of a group could rest near the same fire or within the same shelter. Fire itself changed the night in important ways. Controlled fire, which appears in the archaeological record hundreds of thousands of years ago, provided warmth and light, and may have discouraged some animals from approaching human camps. But fire did not completely transform the night into safety. A small flame illuminates only a limited circle, leaving most of the surrounding landscape in darkness. Outside that circle, the environment remained unpredictable. For this reason, the presence of other people in the same resting place may have provided another layer of security. A group of individuals produces more sound, more movement, and more awareness than a single person alone. Even when several members of a group were asleep, others might still be lightly awake, shifting position, or listening to the quiet changes of the night. Researchers studying sleep patterns in small-scale societies have observed that group sleeping does not always mean that everyone sleeps deeply at the same time. Instead, periods of wakefulness and rest often overlap among individuals. This creates a natural rhythm in which someone in the group is likely to be awake during many moments of the night, even without a planned watch system. While it is difficult to reconstruct exactly how prehistoric people arranged themselves when they slept, the environmental conditions of early human life make solitary sleep less likely in many situations. The landscapes humans evolved in were shared with many other species, and the absence of permanent architecture meant that protection often came from cooperation rather than physical barriers. Over thousands of generations, the experience of night would have been familiar: fading light, a gathering around a shared fire, and the quiet presence of others resting nearby. In that long span of time before cities, bedrooms, and electric light, sleep may have been less about withdrawing from the group and more about remaining inside it, even while the mind slowly drifted toward rest. Long before the appearance of cities or permanent houses, the daily rhythm of human life followed the movement of the sun. When daylight faded, activities that depended on clear vision became difficult or even dangerous. The landscape that had been open and familiar during the day gradually turned into a quieter and more uncertain environment. For people living tens of thousands of years ago, this transition was part of an ordinary cycle repeated every evening. Yet the arrival of darkness still changed how the human body and mind related to the surrounding world. Human vision, like that of many primates, is adapted primarily for daylight. Compared with animals that are specialized for nocturnal life, humans see relatively poorly in low light. Colors fade, depth becomes harder to judge, and distant movement is more difficult to detect. This biological limitation meant that once darkness spread across the landscape, early humans lost one of their most important senses for navigating the environment. At the same time, other creatures that shared the same habitats often became more active after sunset. Many predators hunt during twilight or nighttime hours, when their own sensory advantages give them an edge. The night, therefore, was not simply a quiet pause in the day. It was a period when the balance between humans and the rest of the animal world could temporarily shift. Because of this, the approach of evening likely encouraged behaviors that reduced vulnerability. One of the simplest ways to reduce risk in any social species is to remain close to others. A group provides more eyes, more ears, and more opportunities to detect subtle changes in the environment. Even when individuals rest, the collective presence of several people changes the character of a place. Small movements, occasional sounds, and shifting positions can make it harder for predators to approach unnoticed. The advantage of numbers is a pattern seen across many animals that live in groups, from grazing mammals to certain species of birds. Humans are not unique in benefiting from this effect, but the way it shaped human sleep may have been influenced by another characteristic of our species: the strong tendency to organize life around social bonds. Anthropological research suggests that the typical human group during much of prehistory consisted of extended family members and long-term companions. These groups often included children, adults of different ages, and elders who shared knowledge and responsibilities. Daily activities such as gathering food, preparing tools, and caring for young children were carried out cooperatively. When night arrived, the same network of relationships likely remained physically close, simply because separation would have required additional effort and risk. The structure of early camps also encouraged proximity. Many archaeological sites from prehistoric periods reveal central hearths surrounded by areas where tools were made, food was processed, and people likely rested. A fire placed near the center of a camp provided warmth and light to those gathered around it. If several individuals lay down to sleep in the same general area, the heat of the fire could be shared efficiently. This arrangement also allowed people to remain within hearing distance of one another. Quiet sounds, someone shifting position, a child stirring, a log settling in the fire could travel easily through the small space of a camp at night. These subtle signals may have played a role in maintaining awareness within the group even when most individuals were asleep. The human brain does not shut down completely during sleep. Studies of modern sleep show that certain regions remain sensitive to unexpected sounds or disturbances. In environments where people rest together, these faint signals from others can provide reassurance that the group is still present and active. The presence of familiar breathing or movement nearby may create a sense of safety that allows deeper rest than complete isolation might permit in an exposed environment. While the exact details of prehistoric sleep arrangements remain uncertain, the combination of environmental pressures and social organization makes shared sleeping spaces plausible for much of human history. Darkness limited human perception, the landscape contained potential dangers, and the small communities in which people lived already depended heavily on cooperation. Under those conditions, remaining close to others during the vulnerable hours of the night would have been a practical extension of the same cooperative life that filled the daytime. Seen in this wider context, the habit of sleeping near other members of a group may not have been an unusual behavior at all. It may simply have been a natural continuation of how humans move through the world together, from the bright activity of day to the quiet stillness of night. As the evening settled over prehistoric landscapes, the final activities of the day often slowed into quieter routines. The search for food paused, tools were set aside, and attention gradually shifted toward maintaining the small center of life that remained visible in the darkness, the fire. Archaeological discoveries from many regions of the world show that hearths were a repeated feature of human camps for hundreds of thousands of years. These hearths were not only sources of heat and light, they also formed a natural focal point around which people gathered after sunset. The glow of a fire rarely spreads very far. Even a steady flame lights only a limited circle, leaving most of the surrounding environment in shadow. Because of this, people sitting near a fire naturally remain close together. The circle of warmth and light becomes a shared boundary between the group and the darker landscape beyond. Within that small illuminated space, conversation, quiet activity, and eventually sleep could unfold while the rest of the night remained outside the edge of the firelight. In this setting, the transition from wakefulness to sleep may have been gradual rather than sudden. People could continue simple tasks such as repairing tools, preparing food, or telling stories while the fire burned low. Anthropologists studying recent small-scale societies have observed that evening hours are often a time for conversation and storytelling, especially in communities without artificial lighting. While modern environments often separate daytime work from nighttime rest through strict schedules, earlier human societies may have experienced a softer transition between activity and sleep. Individuals might lie down when tired while others remained awake a little longer beside the same fire. Over time, the camp would grow quieter as more members of the group drifted into sleep. The physical layout of many early shelters would have supported this shared experience of night. Temporary structures made from branches, animal skins, or plant materials rarely divided space into separate rooms. In caves or rock shelters, the available flat areas for resting were also limited. As a result, people resting in the same shelter would naturally lie near one another, sometimes arranged around the warmest area of the camp. This arrangement could allow the warmth from bodies and fire to spread through the small space more efficiently than if individuals slept far apart. In cooler climates especially, conserving warmth during the night could make a meaningful difference in comfort and safety. Human bodies lose heat gradually during sleep as muscles relax and activity decreases. Remaining close to others would reduce the exposed surface area of each individual and allow shared body warmth to contribute to maintaining temperature. Observations of many animals show similar patterns. Mammals that live in groups often rest in clusters, especially in colder environments. Humans are not immune to the same physical realities of heat and cold. When clothing, insulated bedding, and enclosed buildings were limited or absent, proximity to others could help maintain warmth through the long hours before sunrise. Yet warmth alone does not fully explain why people might have slept near each other. The social nature of human life likely played an equally important role. Throughout most of our species' history, survival depended on cooperation. Food was gathered collectively, knowledge about landscapes and seasons was shared, and children required long periods of care from adults. The same relationships that structured daytime activities did not disappear when the sun went down. Night did not dissolve the group. It simply changed the pace of interaction. The presence of familiar individuals nearby could transform the uncertainty of darkness into a more stable environment. Even the quiet sounds of others breathing or shifting in their sleep might signal that the group remained intact. These subtle cues can have a calming effect on the human mind. In modern studies of sleep environments, researchers have found that unfamiliar silence or isolation can sometimes increase alertness rather than relaxation, especially in settings that feel uncertain. For early humans living in open landscapes, complete solitude at night may have been rare or even uncomfortable. Instead, the shared space of the camp allowed sleep to occur within the same network of relationships that supported life during the day. When seen from this long perspective, the idea of sleeping close to others begins to appear less like an unusual cultural habit and more like a natural extension of the cooperative life that shaped our species. For generation after generation, evening fires gathered people into small circles of light, where conversation slowed, bodies rested, and the presence of others quietly filled the darkness. Within those circles, sleep did not separate individuals from the group. It happened inside the group itself, as the night gradually carried everyone toward morning. Long before the appearance of written history, the ancestors of modern humans lived in environments that required constant movement and cooperation. For hundreds of thousands of years, small groups traveled through forests, grasslands, and river valleys in search of plants, animals, and seasonal resources. These communities were not permanent settlements with fixed boundaries. Instead, they were flexible social groups that adapted to changing landscapes. Anthropologists often describe these early human societies as bands, small communities usually made up of extended families and long-term companions. The size of such groups varied depending on the environment, but they were generally small enough that most members knew each other personally and relied on one another for daily survival. Within these groups, nearly every aspect of life involved cooperation. Finding food required shared knowledge about where plants grew, when animals migrated, and how landscapes changed with the seasons. Hunting large animals often required coordination among several individuals. Gathering plant foods was also more efficient when people moved together and shared information. Caring for children, who developed slowly compared with the young of many other species, demanded attention from multiple adults over many years. This pattern of shared responsibility shaped how human communities organized themselves across generations. Because life depended so strongly on cooperation, separation from the group could carry serious risks. A single person moving alone across unfamiliar terrain might struggle to find food, avoid predators, or navigate safely between distant resources. Even simple injuries could become dangerous without companions to assist. For this reason, humans evolved not only as physically adaptable creatures, but also as deeply social beings whose survival depended on remaining connected to others. This social structure did not disappear when the sun set. The same relationships that guided daily activities likely continued to shape how people rested at night. When a group finished the tasks of the day and gathered near a fire or within a temporary shelter, the individuals present were often the same companions who had shared the work of the day. Under those conditions, sleeping close to one another required no special planning. It was simply a continuation of the same cooperative life that filled the daylight hours. The environments where early humans lived also influenced how groups organized themselves at night. Many prehistoric landscapes offered only limited protected spaces for resting. Rock overhangs, shallow caves, or sheltered areas among trees could provide some protection from wind and weather, but these places were rarely large enough to support widely separated sleeping areas. When several members of a group used the same shelter, proximity became almost unavoidable. Even in open camps without caves or rock shelters, a central fire often defined the usable area of the camp. The warmth and light of the fire encouraged people to remain nearby, especially as temperatures dropped after sunset. In addition to environmental constraints, the rhythms of the human body also played a role in shaping nighttime behavior. Human sleep is divided into cycles that alternate between lighter and deeper stages. During lighter stages of sleep, the brain remains sensitive to sounds or movements in the surrounding environment. This sensitivity may help explain why complete isolation during sleep is not always the most comfortable condition for humans, particularly in unfamiliar settings. The presence of other individuals nearby can create a subtle network of signals, breathing, shifting positions, quiet sounds that indicate the continued presence of the group. Over long stretches of human history, these shared signals may have become part of the natural context in which sleep occurred. It is important to remember that the exact sleeping arrangements of prehistoric communities cannot be reconstructed in detail. Archaeological evidence rarely preserves direct traces of how individuals positioned themselves when they rested. However, the broader patterns of human evolution provide useful clues. Humans evolved in small social groups, depended on cooperation for survival, and lived in environments where isolation could increase vulnerability. When these factors are considered together, the idea that people frequently rested near one another becomes easier to understand. Sleep, in that long period of human history, may have been less about withdrawing from society and more about remaining within it while the body recovered from the work of the day. To understand why so much of human history may have involved sleeping in groups, it helps to look at a broader feature of human evolution. Our species did not develop as a solitary animal that later learned to cooperate. From the beginning, humans were shaped inside relationships. Compared with many mammals, human infants are born unusually dependent. Human childhood lasts a very long time, and adult survival has often depended on shared effort rather than individual strength alone. These traits suggest that the social group was not a secondary part of human life. It was one of the main conditions under which human life became possible at all. This matters for sleep because sleep is one of the moments when an animal becomes least able to protect itself. A species that depends on group life during waking hours may also be expected to carry that dependence into the night. In many prehistoric settings, this would not have required a formal rule or conscious decision. The group was already the center of life. Food was shared within it, children were protected within it, knowledge was preserved within it, and dangers were faced within it. When darkness arrived, there was little reason to imagine that rest would suddenly become private. In fact, the opposite may have been more likely. Sleep could remain embedded in the same social structure that organized the rest of existence. This pattern becomes easier to imagine when we consider the slow development of the human child. Unlike the young of many animals, human children cannot move independently, regulate themselves easily, or survive without long and patient care. Night would have been one of the times when their vulnerability was most obvious. Infants needed warmth, feeding, and physical proximity. Slightly older children also needed reassurance and supervision. This alone would have made isolated adult sleep less practical in many cases. If mothers, caregivers, siblings, and children all remained near one another during the night, then group sleep was not merely a matter of protection from the outside world. It was also a way of holding together the internal life of the group itself. The needs of the youngest members could shape the resting patterns of everyone else. Another clue comes from the way human communities appear to have balanced mobility with social stability. For much of prehistory, groups moved across landscapes rather than remaining in fixed settlements. Yet even while moving, they maintained enduring social ties. This suggests that the human group functioned as a portable form of security. Shelter could change. The season could change. A riverbank, a grove of trees, or the edge of a rocky slope might become the camp for only a short time, but the social body of the group remained more continuous than the place itself. In a world where the physical setting shifted often, familiar people may have been the most stable part of the environment. Sleeping near them would therefore have offered more than warmth or protection. It would also have offered continuity. The body could enter rest not in a fixed room, but in a familiar human presence carried from place to place. Anthropologists often note that in small-scale societies, daily life tends to involve less strict separation between individual and collective activity than in modern industrial settings. Tasks are shared, spaces are shared, and much of life happens within earshot of others. This does not mean prehistoric people lacked privacy in every sense, but it does suggest that the modern habit of imagining personal space as the default condition may not fit the deeper past of our species. For early humans, closeness was often ordinary. Distance was more likely to mean danger, separation, or uncertainty. When seen through that lens, sleeping in groups begins to look less like a special survival strategy used only in moments of threat, and more like a basic expression of the kind of creature humans had already become. We were not simply animals that happened to rest side by side because circumstances forced it. We were a species whose social world may have continued through the night, so that even sleep took place inside the shared life of the group rather than outside it. For a modern person, it is easy to imagine sleep as a retreat from other people. A day may be shared with family, work, conversation, and noise, but night often ends behind a closed door, in a separate room, on an individual bed. This pattern feels so normal that it can seem timeless. Yet the longer view of human evolution suggests that this arrangement is very new. For most of our species past, the social group was not something left behind at bedtime. It was the setting within which nearly all important human activities took place, including rest. One reason this matters is that humans are unusual in how much they depend on learned knowledge. Unlike animals that can rely mostly on fixed instinct, human beings survive by remembering places, seasons, plants, animal behavior, social rules, and practical skills that must be passed from one person to another. In early human communities, knowledge lived inside the group. Older individuals carried experience about landscapes and danger. Adults in their strongest years carried much of the burden of movement, food gathering, and protection. Children learned slowly by remaining close to others over long periods of time. This made the group itself more than a collection of individuals. It became the main structure that held together memory, skill, protection, and care. In such a world, staying near others at night was not simply about comfort. It may also have reflected the deeper reality that human life was organized collectively at almost every level. The body slept where life already happened. This idea becomes even clearer when we think about how exposed prehistoric life often was to changes in weather, terrain, and season. A small human group could not reshape the environment on a large scale. There were no insulated buildings, no reliable artificial heating systems, and no fixed barriers separating daily life from the wider landscape. Instead, people adapted by moving, by using local materials, by building temporary shelters, and by relying on each other. The group itself functioned as a kind of living shelter, not in a symbolic sense, but in a physical one. Other people helped find food, carry children, detect danger, share warmth, and maintain the fire. In this sense, social life was one part of the practical machinery of survival. When night arrived, it would have made sense for that machinery to remain together rather than scatter into isolated units. Sleep did not remove the need for cooperation. If anything, it exposed how necessary cooperation still was. Another important point is that group sleeping does not mean a single uniform arrangement across all of prehistory. Human societies have always been flexible. Some groups likely slept in tighter clusters than others. Climate, shelter type, family structure, and the presence of fire would all have influenced how people arranged themselves. In warmer regions, bodies may have rested with more space between them, while still sharing the same camp. In colder conditions, closeness would have carried obvious advantages. In some places, a mother and infant may have slept closest together, while others arranged themselves around a hearth or within the protected limits of a shelter. The details surely varied, but the broader pattern remains plausible because the conditions of human evolution repeatedly favored social proximity over isolation. What emerges from this long view is not a rigid image of prehistoric sleep, but a more grounded way of thinking about it. Human beings came into existence as members of small interdependent groups. We moved together, ate together, learned together, raised children together, and likely entered the night together as well. The habits of the day did not suddenly disappear in darkness. They were carried into it. In that sense, the question is not only why humans may have slept in groups, but why modern people so easily assume that sleep was always meant to happen alone. The deeper history of our species points in another direction, toward a past in which the group remained the true center of human life, even in the quietest hours before dawn. Long before insulated houses, thick blankets, or carefully controlled indoor temperatures, the human body faced the night in a much more direct way. When the sun disappeared and the air cooled, the environment could change quickly. In many parts of the world, temperatures drop noticeably after sunset, even in regions that are warm during the day. For people living outdoors or in simple shelters, this shift would have been felt by the body almost immediately. Human skin, unlike the fur of many mammals, provides relatively little natural insulation. Our species relies more on clothing, shelter, and fire to maintain warmth. Yet these technologies developed gradually over time, and for most of prehistory they remained limited in how much protection they could offer. Because of this, the problem of staying warm during the night was likely a regular part of life for early human groups. The body's response to cooler temperatures during sleep is different from its response during waking activity. When people are awake and moving, muscles generate heat and circulation helps distribute that warmth through the body. During sleep, however, muscle activity decreases and the body's temperature regulation becomes slightly less active. Core temperature tends to fall naturally during the early part of the night, as the body prepares for deeper stages of rest. This process is normal and even helpful for sleep, but it also means that the body becomes somewhat more sensitive to the surrounding environment. In a modern bedroom, walls and bedding help maintain a stable temperature around the sleeping body. In prehistoric environments, such stability would have been harder to achieve. Even when early humans used fire, the warmth produced by a single hearth could only extend so far. A fire might warm the air immediately around it, but the outer edges of a camp would still feel the cooler night air. The ground itself could also draw heat away from the body. Lying on earth, stone, or plant materials meant that some warmth was continuously lost to the surface beneath. These physical realities made the conservation of body heat an important part of nighttime comfort and safety. One simple way many animals reduce heat loss is by resting close together. This behavior appears across a wide range of species, especially among mammals that live in groups. When bodies are near each other, the total exposed surface area decreases and the warmth produced by each individual contributes to the surrounding air. Even small differences in temperature can become meaningful over many hours of sleep. Humans share the same basic biological processes that govern heat exchange in other mammals. Although people are capable of sleeping alone in a wide range of conditions, the presence of others nearby can subtly influence the thermal environment around the body. In prehistoric settings, this effect may have been particularly helpful during colder nights or in open landscapes where wind and air movement increased heat loss. Observations of traditional hunter-gatherer communities suggest that sleeping areas were often organized in ways that allowed people to remain within a shared space. Sometimes this meant resting around a central fire. In other cases, it involved lying within the same shelter, where walls of branches, skins, or vegetation help block wind and trap warmth. Within such shelters, several bodies resting in the same area could contribute to maintaining a slightly warmer environment than the surrounding air outside. Children and infants would have been especially sensitive to nighttime cooling, and their presence alone might have encouraged closer sleeping arrangements within families. It is important to avoid imagining these arrangements as identical everywhere. Climate, shelter type, and available materials would have influenced how much closeness was needed. In warmer regions, people might have slept with more distance between them while still sharing the same space. In colder conditions, the advantages of proximity would have been more obvious. What remains consistent across these possibilities is the underlying challenge. The human body, with relatively little natural insulation, had to manage the cooling of night with limited technology. In that context, the quiet presence of others nearby may have provided more than companionship. It could also have helped create a small pocket of warmth in a landscape that gradually cooled after sunset, allowing the body to rest more comfortably through the long hours before morning returned. As the night deepened in prehistoric landscapes, the gradual cooling of the air would have been a familiar experience repeated across generations. During the day, sunlight warms the ground, plants, and surrounding air. After sunset, that stored warmth slowly escapes back into the atmosphere. The ground releases heat, breezes carry cooler air across open terrain, and temperatures often fall steadily until the early hours before dawn. In modern environments, this change is often softened by buildings, clothing, and heating systems. In the deep past, however, the human body felt the night more directly. Even in climates that appear warm during daylight, nighttime cooling can become noticeable once activity slows and the body prepares for sleep. The human body maintains a relatively stable internal temperature, but this stability depends partly on how much heat escapes through the skin. During waking hours, movement helps produce warmth and circulation distributes that heat throughout the body. When people lie down to sleep, muscles relax and physical activity stops. The production of heat decreases, and the body naturally begins to cool slightly as part of the sleep cycle. This mild drop in core temperature is associated with the transition into deeper stages of sleep. Yet this same process also means that the sleeping body becomes more dependent on its surroundings for maintaining comfort. If the surrounding air becomes too cool, the body may wake more easily or shift positions in an attempt to preserve warmth. In prehistoric camps, the surfaces people rested upon would have influenced this balance as well. Unlike modern beds, which often include layers designed to reduce heat loss, the ground can draw warmth away from the body through direct contact. Stone, packed earth, or even plant materials can conduct heat outward over many hours. Fire could partially offset this effect, but its influence depended on distance and the amount of fuel available. Maintaining a fire through the entire night requires attention and materials, and the warmth from a single hearth rarely spreads evenly across a large space. For individuals resting near the edges of a camp, the cooling of the night air might still be noticeable. In this setting, the simple presence of other bodies could subtly influence the local environment. Human bodies release heat continuously, even while asleep. When several individuals rest within the same small area, the combined warmth they produce can raise the temperature of the surrounding air slightly compared with the wider environment. This effect is most noticeable in enclosed or partially sheltered spaces where air movement is limited. A group resting inside a simple structure of branches, skins, or woven plant materials might therefore experience a more stable temperature than a person lying alone in open air. Over the course of many hours, such small differences could make sleep more comfortable and less frequently interrupted by the cold. Observations of social mammals offer a useful comparison. Though human behavior is always shaped by culture as well as biology, many species that live in groups gather together when resting, particularly in cooler environments. This behavior reduces heat loss and allows individuals to conserve energy overnight. Humans, with their relatively hairless skin and slow metabolism during sleep, share some of the same physical constraints. Before the widespread development of thick clothing, insulated bedding, or enclosed buildings, the ability to conserve warmth may have depended partly on how people arranged themselves within their sleeping spaces. Children and infants would have been especially sensitive to these conditions. Younger bodies lose heat more quickly and require additional warmth to remain comfortable through the night. The presence of caregivers nearby could provide both warmth and immediate attention if a child stirred or woke. In this way, the practical needs of the youngest members of a group might have reinforced sleeping arrangements that kept people physically close. Over many generations, such patterns could become familiar habits shaped by both environmental necessity and social life. None of this suggests that prehistoric humans always slept in tight clusters everywhere they lived. Climate, shelter type, and seasonal conditions would have influenced how people rested in different places. Yet the broader challenge of maintaining warmth during long, dark hours remained a common feature of life for early humans. In that quiet struggle against the cooling air of night, the presence of others nearby may have offered a simple advantage, allowing small groups to create a shared pocket of warmth within the vast and cooling landscape around them. When the night grew cold in prehistoric environments, warmth did not come from a single source. It was usually the result of several small factors working together: the remaining heat of the ground from the day, the glow of a fire, the shelter provided by rocks or vegetation, and the natural heat produced by human bodies. None of these alone created a perfectly controlled environment. Instead, they formed a fragile balance that helped people pass through the long hours before sunrise. Understanding this balance helps explain why the presence of others nearby could influence how people rested during the night. The human body constantly produces heat as part of its metabolism. Even during sleep, when movement is minimal and breathing becomes slower, the body continues to generate warmth. This heat radiates outward into the surrounding air and nearby surfaces. In open space, that warmth disappears quickly, carried away by cooler air. In smaller or more sheltered spaces, however, some of it remains in the immediate environment. If several individuals lie within the same area, the combined heat they release can slightly increase the temperature of the air around them. Over many hours, even a small difference in temperature may help maintain comfort during sleep. This effect becomes easier to imagine in the kinds of shelters that appear frequently in archaeological and ethnographic records. Temporary structures made from branches, leaves, animal skins, or grasses often create a semi-enclosed space rather than a fully sealed room. These shelters can reduce wind and trap some warmth, but they usually allow air to circulate slowly. In such a setting, the warmth from a nearby fire and the heat from several resting bodies can remain within the shelter for longer periods than in completely open air. When people lie close enough to share the same space, they effectively contribute to the small climate inside the shelter. Over time, such shared warmth may have helped stabilize the temperature through the coldest hours of the night. Another important factor is the way heat moves between surfaces. When the human body lies directly on the ground, some warmth naturally transfers into the earth or stone beneath. Early humans sometimes used plant materials, animal skins, or layers of vegetation to reduce this effect, creating simple sleeping surfaces that separated the body slightly from the ground. Yet these materials were often thin and temporary compared with modern bedding. In colder conditions, the warmth from nearby bodies could help offset some of the heat that slowly disappeared into the surface below. By resting within the same area, individuals could share the limited warmth available inside a camp. The presence of fire also shaped these arrangements. Fires were valuable but required attention and fuel to maintain through the night. A single hearth might not burn strongly until morning, unless someone occasionally added wood or adjusted the embers. Because the brightest heat usually came from a small central area, people resting nearby would naturally gather within that zone of warmth. Those further away might feel cooler air as the night progressed. Over time, the physical layout of the camp could encourage people to settle in positions that allowed them to remain close to both the fire and one another. This arrangement would not necessarily require deliberate planning. It could emerge naturally from the simple desire to stay comfortable while resting. Climate differences would have influenced how important these effects were. In warm tropical environments, maintaining warmth might not have been a major concern for most of the year. In cooler regions or seasons, however, the difference between sleeping alone and sleeping near others could become more noticeable. Human groups have always adapted their habits to local conditions, and sleeping arrangements likely changed with climate, shelter design, and available materials. Yet across many possible environments, the basic physical reality remained the same. The human body does not carry thick insulation, and nighttime cooling can gradually draw warmth away from it. In that quiet interaction between body and environment, the simple presence of others nearby could alter the balance. The group itself became part of the nighttime landscape, creating a small shared space of warmth that allowed rest to continue until the first light of morning slowly returned. When darkness settled across prehistoric landscapes, the human body entered a different relationship with the surrounding world. During the day, sight guided most human activity. Eyes could scan the horizon, recognize movement among trees or grass, and distinguish shapes at long distances. But once the sun disappeared, that advantage weakened. Human vision, adapted primarily for daylight, becomes much less effective in low light. Colors fade, edges soften, and distant movement becomes harder to detect. The same environment that appeared familiar during the day could become uncertain once shadows covered the ground. This change mattered because early humans shared their habitats with many other species that moved comfortably through the night. Some animals possess eyes specialized for low light, allowing them to detect movement that humans would miss. Others rely on hearing or smell to navigate darkness more effectively. In that environment, the night did not simply mean quiet rest. It meant that the balance between human senses and the senses of other animals shifted in subtle ways. For a human lying down to sleep in an open landscape or simple shelter, the loss of clear vision created a natural vulnerability. Sleep itself deepens that vulnerability. Even though the brain continues to monitor certain sounds and signals during sleep, awareness is reduced compared with wakefulness. Reaction times slow, muscles relax, and attention narrows inward. In modern homes, walls, doors, and lighting reduce the importance of these changes. For most of human history, however, such barriers did not exist. Camps were often temporary, shelters were simple, and the boundary between human space and the wider landscape remained thin. Under those conditions, the presence of others nearby could change how safe the night felt. A single person resting alone might struggle to detect subtle sounds or movements in the darkness. Several individuals resting within the same camp create a very different situation. Each person brings their own senses, even while sleeping lightly. A sound that might pass unnoticed by one individual could wake another. Movement by animals near the camp might trigger shifting, quiet speech, or the stirring of someone tending the fire. These small reactions could ripple through the group, increasing the chance that potential danger would be noticed before it became immediate. Observations of modern hunter-gatherer communities provide some insight into how this process may have worked. In many small-scale societies, people do not all sleep at exactly the same time or remain fully asleep through the entire night. Instead, periods of rest and wakefulness often overlap among individuals. Someone might wake briefly to adjust the fire, check on a child, or simply shift position. Another person may still be awake while others begin to sleep. These overlapping rhythms mean that at least one person in a group is often alert during different moments of the night without a formal plan to maintain watch. The camp, in a sense, develops a natural pattern of distributed awareness. Fire played an important role in shaping these nighttime conditions. Flames and glowing embers produce light that can discourage some animals from approaching too closely. Yet fire rarely eliminates risk completely. Its light reaches only a limited distance, and the surrounding darkness remains beyond that circle. Within that narrow space of illumination, the presence of several individuals could reinforce the sense of security created by the fire itself. The quiet sounds of breathing, shifting bodies, or low voices could signal that the group remained present and attentive to the environment around them. Over thousands of years, such patterns may have shaped how humans experienced the night. Darkness did not isolate individuals in separate spaces as it often does today. Instead, it gathered members of a group into a shared area where warmth, light, and awareness overlapped. Within that circle, Sleep could still occur, but it happened alongside the subtle presence of others whose senses, even when resting, helped maintain a connection between the group and the surrounding world. In the quiet hours of the night, the world around an early human camp did not completely fall silent. Even when the wind was calm and the fire burned steadily, the surrounding landscape continued to move in small and subtle ways. Leaves shifted, distant animals called to one another, and the faint sounds of footsteps or wings occasionally crossed the darkness. For people resting in open environments, these quiet signals were part of the background of life. The ability to notice changes in these sounds could make the difference between a peaceful night and a sudden interruption. Human hearing remains active during sleep, although the brain processes sounds differently than it does while awake. Certain noises can pass unnoticed, while others can trigger brief awakenings or shifts in sleep stages. Researchers studying sleep have found that the brain is especially responsive to unfamiliar or unexpected sounds. Even during deeper phases of rest, the auditory system continues to monitor the environment in a limited way. In modern homes, this function rarely plays an important role because the surrounding environment is relatively controlled. In prehistoric settings, however, the night contained many unpredictable signals. Sleeping within a group may have helped distribute the responsibility of responding to those signals. When several individuals rest in the same space, the chances increase that someone will notice a disturbance. One person might sleep through a faint noise, while another wakes briefly and listens. That moment of awareness could be enough to determine whether the sound was harmless or required attention. If needed, the person who wakes can stir others nearby, allowing the group to respond together. This form of shared awareness does not require everyone to remain alert at the same time. Instead, it emerges naturally from the overlapping sleep patterns that occur within groups of people. Anthropological observations of small-scale societies suggest that night rarely unfolds as a single uninterrupted period of sleep for every member of a group. People may wake briefly, adjust their position, add fuel to the fire, or check on children. These moments of wakefulness occur at different times for different individuals. As a result, the camp often contains at least one person who is awake or lightly resting at many points during the night. Without planning or formal organization, the group develops a pattern in which awareness circulates quietly among its members. The presence of a fire may have reinforced this pattern. A fire rarely maintains the same intensity for many hours without attention. Embers shift, flames fade, and fuel must occasionally be added. Someone near the fire may wake to adjust it, ensuring that the light and warmth continue through the night. While tending the fire, that individual might also listen to the surrounding environment or glance into the darkness beyond the camp. Even a brief moment of alertness can extend the awareness of the entire group. Once the fire is settled again, the person may return to rest while another member of the group wakes later in the night for a different reason. Over many hours, these small awakenings can create a quiet rhythm of observation and rest. Such patterns do not guarantee safety, and prehistoric environments always contained risks that humans could not fully control. However, shared sleeping spaces may have increased the likelihood that disturbances were noticed early. A rustling sound, the movement of animals near a camp, or the shifting of wind through vegetation might trigger attention from one individual even while others remained asleep. The group, in this way, formed a kind of living network of senses. Each person contributed a small portion of awareness to the whole. Over long stretches of human history, this quiet cooperation during the night may have been as natural as the cooperation that filled the daytime hours. The same companions who gathered food, shared stories, and cared for children during daylight also formed the circle of awareness that surrounded the camp when darkness arrived. Even with fire, shelter, and the quiet presence of others, the night remained a time of uncertainty for most of human history. Fire could illuminate a small circle and discourage some animals, but it could not create the kind of sealed protection that modern walls and doors provide. A simple shelter could block wind and soften the cold, yet it often remained open enough for outside sounds, smells, and movement to pass through. In that environment, safety was rarely something absolute. It was usually partial, fragile, and maintained through several overlapping forms of protection rather than one perfect barrier. This is one reason group sleeping may have mattered so much. It did not remove danger, but it may have reduced exposure by surrounding a vulnerable sleeping body with the continued presence of other human bodies. A group changes the atmosphere of a place in ways that go beyond simple numbers. Several people gathered in one camp produce more sound, more scent, more movement, and more visible signs of occupation than a single individual resting alone. For animals moving through the landscape, this may make a camp feel less approachable. Many predators prefer conditions of surprise and reduced resistance. A cluster of humans near a fire is not the same as an isolated sleeper at the edge of a dark landscape. Even when most members of the group are resting, the camp still carries signs of alert life. Embers glow, someone may shift position, a child may stir, and low human sounds may occasionally rise and fade again. These subtle signs can make the human group feel larger and more present than any one sleeping person. In this way, shared sleep may have offered a form of collective defense without requiring constant wakefulness from every member. There is also a social dimension to safety that is easy to overlook. For humans, danger is not only a physical event, it is also something interpreted by the mind. A person lying alone in darkness must monitor the environment with only their own limited senses. A person resting among familiar others experiences the same darkness differently. The body may still remain somewhat alert, but the presence of companions changes the emotional meaning of the surroundings. Familiar breathing, quiet movement, and the nearness of known individuals can signal that the group is intact. That signal may allow the nervous system to settle more fully into rest than complete isolation would in an exposed setting. Modern studies of human sleep suggest that people often sleep differently depending on whether an environment feels safe, known, and socially reassuring. While these studies cannot be projected directly onto prehistory, they support the broader idea that safety in sleep is not only about physical barriers, it is also about context, expectation, and the presence of trusted others. In the long human past, those trusted others were often the most reliable form of stability available at night. The group could not stop the darkness from arriving, and it could not remove every risk from the landscape, but it could transform the meaning of the night by facing it together. This may be one reason why so many human sleeping arrangements, both in the archaeological record and in small-scale societies studied more recently, appear to center on shared spaces rather than strict separation. Sleep happened where people could remain close to warmth, to fire, to children, and to one another. Over many generations, this pattern may have become one of the ordinary conditions under which human rest took place. In the modern world, safety often comes from architecture, locks, insulation, and electric light. In the deeper past, safety was more often built from proximity, shared awareness, and the quiet fact that no one had to face the long, dark hours entirely alone. Human sleep is often described as a time of rest, but it is not a complete retreat from the world. Even in deep sleep, the brain does not become entirely disconnected from its surroundings. Certain systems remain active, continuing to regulate breathing, body temperature, and a limited awareness of sound and movement. This matters because the human body did not evolve under conditions of total separation or perfect safety. For most of our species' history, sleep likely unfolded in environments where some degree of alertness remained useful. A rustle nearby, a child stirring, the sound of shifting embers, or a sudden change in animal calls beyond the camp could all carry meaning. In that kind of setting, the body needed to rest without becoming completely unreachable. Modern sleep research shows that human sleep moves through repeating stages across the night, including lighter and deeper phases. During lighter phases, people are easier to wake and remain more responsive to sound and touch. Even during deeper sleep, the brain still monitors certain signals and can respond if something feels unusual enough. This pattern suggests that human sleep is not simply an on or off condition. It is a layered state in which the body rests while maintaining a partial connection to the outside world. From an evolutionary point of view, that makes sense. A creature that sleeps in exposed or changing environments may benefit from remaining somewhat sensitive to potential disturbances. For humans, this sensitivity may have been especially important because our species relies less on physical defenses and more on anticipation, cooperation, and social support. We do not have claws, thick fur, or the night vision of many predators. What humans developed instead was a flexible mind, a strong social structure, and the ability to share the burden of attention across a group. In sleep, as in waking life, this shared structure may have mattered. If one person remained lightly asleep while another drifted more deeply into rest, the group as a whole would still maintain some awareness of the environment. This possibility becomes more plausible when we consider how different people sleep at different times and in different ways. Not everyone enters the same sleep stage at once. Some individuals wake briefly while others remain asleep. Children stir, adults shift. Older individuals may wake more often, and caregivers may remain more sensitive to sound. In a shared sleeping space, this natural variation creates a quiet distribution of wakefulness across the night. No formal system is required. The group simply never becomes fully unconscious at the same moment. This does not mean prehistoric humans planned their sleep scientifically. It means that the ordinary biology of sleep, when spread across several people, may have created a subtle protective pattern. The human body may therefore be understood not only as an individual sleeper, but as part of a social sleep environment. The presence of others nearby changes what the body can afford to do. A lone sleeper in a vulnerable setting may need to remain more alert, because there is no one else to register a disturbance. A person sleeping within a group may be able to rest more fully, because some portion of environmental awareness has been distributed across other bodies and minds nearby. This idea fits with a broader truth about human evolution. Our species survives not mainly by functioning as isolated individuals, but by living within systems of cooperation. Food is shared, care is shared, risk is shared, and perhaps even the burden of nighttime vigilance was shared as well. Seen in this light, sleep was not merely a private biological act taking place beside others by accident. It may have been one more area in which the human body depended on the presence of the group. The night did not erase our social nature. It may have revealed how deeply that social nature was built into the very way we rested. The human brain enters sleep gradually, passing through several stages that repeat across the night. These stages are not identical in depth or sensitivity. Some are lighter, allowing the sleeper to wake easily if something unusual occurs. Others are deeper, helping the body recover and restore energy after the work of the day. The pattern of these stages forms cycles that last for a limited period before beginning again. Over the course of a long night, a person may pass through several of these cycles, moving slowly between lighter awareness and deeper rest. This structure of sleep has an important implication. It means that the human brain rarely remains completely disconnected from its surroundings for many continuous hours. Even during deeper sleep, the brain continues to monitor certain signals from the environment. Sounds, movement, and physical contact may still be processed at a reduced level of attention. When something appears unusual or unexpected, the sleeper may shift position, change breathing patterns, or wake briefly before returning to sleep. In controlled modern environments, these small awakenings are often unnoticed or quickly forgotten. In earlier environments, they may have played a more meaningful role in maintaining awareness of the surrounding world. When several individuals share the same sleeping space, the natural differences in their sleep cycles become important. Each person enters lighter and deeper stages at slightly different times. One individual may be in a deep phase while another remains closer to the surface of sleep. A third may briefly wake to adjust position or respond to a small disturbance. When viewed across an entire group, these differences create a pattern in which some level of awareness is almost always present somewhere within the camp. No single individual needs to remain alert throughout the night, yet the group as a whole rarely reaches a moment when everyone is equally unaware of the environment. Researchers who study sleep patterns in small communities have observed rhythms that resemble this kind of distributed wakefulness. Individuals often wake briefly during the night for ordinary reasons, to shift position, check on children, add fuel to a fire, or simply because sleep cycles naturally move toward lighter stages. These awakenings are usually short and may last only a few moments before the person returns to rest. However, when several people sleep in the same area, these moments overlap in a way that keeps the group loosely connected to its surroundings. In a quiet camp, even a slight change in posture or breathing can carry subtle signals through the shared space. The human brain appears particularly sensitive to familiar voices and sounds produced by known individuals. Experiments in sleep research show that people often react differently to familiar and unfamiliar noises during rest. Familiar sounds may be interpreted as safe and ignored, while unfamiliar ones can trigger greater alertness. In a shared sleeping environment, This distinction may help the brain filter information efficiently. The quiet breathing of companions or the shifting of someone nearby may become part of the expected background of the night. A sudden unfamiliar noise beyond the camp, however, could stand out more clearly against that background. Over many generations, this interaction between individual sleep cycles and shared environments may have shaped how humans rested in groups. The brain did not need to remain fully awake to contribute to the safety of the group. Instead, brief awakenings, lighter stages of sleep, and the natural responsiveness of hearing could combine to create a loose network of awareness across several individuals. In this way, the group did not simply share warmth or space. It also shared a distributed form of vigilance that allowed each person to sleep more deeply at times while still remaining connected to the wider environment. Seen from this perspective, group sleep may have worked partly because human biology already supports a flexible balance between rest and awareness. The body can recover from the day's activity while the mind continues to listen quietly to the world beyond closed eyes. Human sleep is sometimes imagined as a complete withdrawal from the outside world, but biology suggests a more balanced state. While the body rests and restores energy, parts of the brain remain quietly attentive to signals from the environment. This balance between rest and awareness may have been especially important in the kinds of landscapes where early humans lived. Unlike animals that retreat into enclosed nests or burrows, human beings historically rested in places that were only partly sheltered from the wider world. Camps, simple structures, or the protected edges of caves could reduce exposure to wind or weather, but they rarely formed sealed spaces. Because of this, sleep needed to allow recovery without entirely abandoning awareness of what might be happening nearby. One way the human body appears to manage this balance is through its sensitivity to certain sounds during sleep. Studies of sleeping brains show that auditory processing continues even when consciousness fades. The brain does not analyze every sound in detail, but it does continue to filter information and respond selectively to signals that appear meaningful or unexpected. This ability helps explain why people sometimes wake quickly to a sudden noise while remaining asleep through other sounds that repeat regularly. Familiar patterns can be absorbed into the background of sleep, while unusual disturbances can draw attention more strongly. In a shared sleeping space, this sensitivity may interact with the presence of other individuals in subtle ways. When several people rest near each other, their breathing, movement, and occasional quiet sounds form a stable pattern that the brain can gradually recognize as safe. Once that pattern becomes familiar, it may require little attention from the sleeper. The mind can rest more fully because the surrounding signals remain predictable. If something outside that pattern occurs, a sudden movement near the edge of the camp, a change in animal sounds, or a disturbance in the fire, the difference may stand out more clearly against the expected background. In this way, the group itself may help define the boundary between normal nighttime sounds and unusual events. The social nature of humans adds another layer to this pattern. People often respond strongly to the presence or absence of others, even while asleep. The brain is particularly tuned to recognize familiar voices, breathing patterns, or movements associated with known individuals. Caregivers may wake quickly when a child stirs, and parents sometimes respond to subtle sounds that others do not notice. These responses suggest that human sleep remains connected to social relationships in ways that are not always conscious. When several members of a group rest together, these quiet sensitivities may create a network of awareness spread across the group. One person's brief awakening might not even be noticed by others, yet it still contributes to maintaining contact with the environment. If a child turns or murmurs in sleep, a nearby adult might shift position or wake momentarily. If embers settle in the fire, someone closest to it may adjust the wood. If a sound emerges from the darkness beyond the camp, the individual whose sleep is lightest at that moment may open their eyes and listen before returning to rest. None of these actions require deliberate coordination. They arise naturally from the biology of sleep interacting with the social closeness of the group. Over time, such patterns could allow individuals to rest more deeply than they might if completely alone. The responsibility of noticing change was not carried by one person continuously. Instead, it moved quietly from one sleeper to another across the hours of darkness. In that sense, sleep within a group may have been both a biological and social process. The body rested, the mind remained softly connected to its surroundings, and the group itself formed a living environment in which awareness could circulate gently through the night. One of the most distinctive features of human life is the unusually long period of childhood. Compared with many other mammals, human infants are born in a highly dependent state and require years of care before they can survive independently. This extended period of growth shapes nearly every aspect of human society, from how families organize themselves to how knowledge and skills are passed from one generation to the next. It also influences how human groups structure their daily routines, including the quiet hours of the night when sleep becomes necessary. In many animal species, newborns are capable of moving, feeding, or regulating their own body temperature within a short time after birth. Human infants develop much more slowly. They rely on adults for warmth, nourishment, protection, and reassurance for a long period of time. Even after the earliest months of life, children remain physically vulnerable and require supervision as they grow. This biological pattern means that caregiving cannot be confined to the hours of daylight alone. The needs of infants and young children continue through the night, when they may wake for feeding, warmth, or comfort. In modern homes, nighttime care often takes place within private rooms or separate sleeping arrangements. Yet for most of human history, the environments in which people lived were far less divided. Temporary shelters, shared living spaces, and open camps rarely provided separate areas designed specifically for individual sleep. Instead, families and companions often remained within the same general space throughout the day and night. In such settings, keeping children close during sleep would have been both practical and reassuring. A caregiver resting nearby could respond quickly if a child stirred or cried. The physical closeness between adults and children may have allowed nighttime care to occur smoothly without fully disrupting the rest of the group. The presence of children within a camp also affects how sleep unfolds for everyone else. Young children do not always follow regular sleep patterns. They may wake more frequently, move during sleep, or respond to small changes in temperature or sound. When several members of a group share the same resting space, these movements can create a gentle rhythm of awareness across the night. A parent may wake briefly when a child shifts position. Another adult might stir if the fire fades or if someone nearby adjusts their bedding. These moments of wakefulness, while small, can contribute to maintaining a subtle level of attentiveness within the group. Over time, such rhythms may have blended naturally with the biological cycles of sleep already present in adults. The importance of caregiving in human societies also extends beyond parents alone. Anthropologists studying small-scale communities often observe that childcare is shared among multiple members of a group. Older siblings, grandparents, and other adults may all participate in watching over children. This shared responsibility can create an environment where several people remain aware of the needs of younger members during the night. In a shared sleeping space, this network of attention becomes easier to maintain because everyone remains within hearing distance of one another. Even a quiet sound from a child may be noticed by more than one adult nearby. The long human childhood therefore adds another dimension to the idea of group sleeping. It suggests that proximity at night was not only about protection from the outside environment, but also about caring for the most vulnerable members within the group itself. Children needed warmth, reassurance, and quick responses when they woke. Adults, in turn, could rest more easily when they knew that other members of the group were nearby and attentive to the same responsibilities. Over thousands of generations, these patterns of shared care may have shaped how human communities experienced the night. The camp did not divide neatly into separate sleeping individuals. Instead, it remained a small social world where adults, children, and elders rested close enough to respond to one another when needed. In this way, the long human childhood may have quietly reinforced the habit of sleeping together, weaving caregiving into the fabric of nighttime life, just as deeply as it was woven into the activities of the day. The long dependency of human children does more than shape family life during the day. It also changes how the night unfolds within a community. When a group includes infants and young children, sleep becomes a shared responsibility rather than a purely individual activity. The needs of the youngest members continue through the dark hours, and those needs often require the presence of nearby adults. A child may wake because of hunger, discomfort, or a sudden change in the surrounding environment. In a setting where caregivers rest close by, these moments can be addressed quickly and quietly, allowing both child and adult to return to rest without long disruption. This arrangement becomes easier to imagine when we consider how human infants regulate warmth and comfort. Very young children cannot control their body temperature as effectively as adults, and they rely heavily on the surrounding environment to remain comfortable. In prehistoric settings where insulation and heating were limited, the presence of nearby bodies may have helped stabilize the warmth of a sleeping area. A caregiver resting near an infant could also provide immediate contact if the child stirred or became unsettled. Such closeness would have reduced the time needed to respond, which is especially important when small children depend entirely on adults for protection and care. Over many generations, these practical needs could naturally encourage sleeping arrangements that kept families within the same general space during the night. The social structure of early human groups may have reinforced this pattern even further. In many small-scale societies studied by anthropologists, the care of children is not carried out by parents alone. Grandparents, older siblings, and other members of the group often participate in caregiving. This broader system of shared responsibility is sometimes described as cooperative care. Instead of placing the entire burden on one individual, the group distributes attention among several people who remain within reach of the child. During the night, this arrangement becomes easier when everyone rests near one another. If a child wakes, more than one adult may be able to hear or respond. The task of reassurance or feeding does not fall on a single person, isolated from the rest of the group. Even the presence of other quiet sleepers nearby can create a stable environment in which children feel less distressed by sudden changes in the night. Another aspect of childhood that influences sleeping arrangements is the way children learn about the world. Young humans acquire knowledge slowly through observation and participation. They watch how adults respond to situations, listen to conversations, and absorb patterns of behavior that shape their understanding of the environment. In prehistoric settings, this process of learning likely continued into the evening hours. Children resting near adults could hear stories, quiet conversations, and the sounds of camp life before sleep fully arrived. The transition from wakefulness to rest may therefore have occurred within a shared social atmosphere rather than in complete separation. These experiences would not only comfort children but also integrate them gradually into the rhythms of the group. When night finally settled and most voices faded, the proximity between adults and children would remain. That closeness could allow caregivers to respond quickly to movement or distress without fully waking the entire camp. Over time, these small interactions form a pattern in which sleep and caregiving become intertwined. The group rests, but it also remains ready to respond to the needs of its youngest members. This does not mean that prehistoric sleep was always peaceful or uninterrupted. Children waking at night have always been part of human life. Yet the presence of several caregivers within the same space may have helped distribute the effort required to manage these moments. Instead of one person carrying the entire responsibility alone, the group could absorb small disturbances collectively. In this way, the long human childhood may have quietly shaped the nighttime structure of early communities. The camp was not simply a collection of individuals lying down after a day of work. It remained a living network of care, where adults, children, and elders rested close enough to support one another through the silent hours before dawn. As children grow beyond infancy, their dependence on adults slowly changes, but it does not disappear quickly. Human childhood unfolds over many years, and during that time young individuals continue to rely on the presence of older members of the group for guidance, protection, and emotional reassurance. This prolonged development has shaped human societies in ways that extend far beyond learning and education. It also influences how families and communities arrange themselves physically, including where and how people rest during the night. In many prehistoric environments, children would have spent most of their time close to adults, not only because they required supervision but also because they learned by observing daily activities. The same pattern likely continued as evening approached. When the work of the day slowed and the group gathered around a fire or within a shelter, children remained nearby. The fire provided warmth and light, and the adults nearby carried the knowledge and security that children depended on. As fatigue gradually replaced conversation, it would have been natural for younger members of the group to fall asleep within that same shared space, rather than moving to distant or separate areas. This continuity between daytime social life and nighttime rest may have helped create a stable emotional environment for children. The darkness of night can be unsettling, especially in places where unfamiliar sounds and movements are common. A child resting near trusted adults may experience the night differently than one who lies alone in an unfamiliar setting. The presence of familiar voices, breathing, and quiet movements provides signals that the group remains intact and attentive. These signals do not need to be loud or deliberate. Even small sounds can reassure the mind that the surrounding world has not suddenly changed. Over many generations, the habit of sleeping close to others may therefore have supported not only physical safety, but also emotional stability within the group. Older children also play a role in shaping how sleep unfolds within a camp. Unlike infants, they may move during sleep, change position frequently, or wake briefly before settling again. In a shared space, these movements contribute to the subtle rhythm of the night. A child shifting position might cause a nearby adult to stir. An older sibling may wake momentarily when a younger child speaks or moves. These small reactions ripple quietly through the group without necessarily disturbing everyone. Instead of a single person remaining responsible for every change during the night, awareness circulates gently among several individuals. This pattern mirrors the cooperative structure that defines much of human life during waking hours. Another aspect of childhood that influences group sleeping is the presence of elders within many human communities. Grandparents and older adults often play important roles in supporting families and sharing knowledge. Their experience with children and long familiarity with community life can make them valuable caregivers, especially during quiet nighttime hours when others rest more deeply. In shared sleeping spaces, elders may remain sensitive to small sounds or movements simply because sleep patterns change with age. This natural variation can contribute to the quiet distribution of awareness within the group. Younger adults, older adults, and children all bring slightly different rhythms of sleep and wakefulness to the same shared environment. Together, these rhythms may create a living pattern in which the group never becomes completely unaware of its surroundings. Over the long history of human communities, the presence of children and elders likely made solitary sleeping less practical in many circumstances. Nighttime life was not organized around isolated individuals retreating into separate spaces. Instead, it revolved around families and companions who remained within reach of one another as the camp grew quiet. The long human childhood, combined with the support of extended family members, may therefore have reinforced the tendency for groups to rest together. In the deep past, sleep was not only about recovering from the day's labor, it was also about maintaining the bonds of care that allowed each generation to grow safely within the shared life of the group. For much of human history, the best clues about everyday life come not from written records, but from careful observation of communities that still live in ways similar to ancient hunter-gatherer societies. Anthropologists have spent decades studying such groups in different parts of the world, documenting how people organize their camps, how they share food, and how daily routines unfold from morning until night. These observations cannot recreate prehistoric life exactly, but they offer valuable windows into patterns that may resemble the social environments in which humans evolved. One of the most noticeable features of many hunter-gatherer camps is the shared nature of living space. Rather than dividing life into many separate rooms or private areas, camps often consist of open spaces or simple shelters arranged around a central fire. The fire provides warmth and light, and it naturally becomes a gathering point as daylight fades. People sit, talk, repair tools, prepare food, or simply rest near this central place. As evening deepens and activity slows, the same space gradually transforms into the sleeping area of the group. Individuals may spread simple bedding materials such as leaves, skins, or mats, but they usually remain within the same general area where the evening gathering occurred. In these settings, the boundaries between daytime activity and nighttime rest are often soft rather than sharply defined. Instead of everyone leaving the fire and disappearing into separate rooms, people drift into sleep while remaining within the shared space of the camp. Some individuals may lie down earlier, while others remain awake for conversation or quiet tasks. Over time, the group gradually settles into rest. The presence of several sleepers in the same area does not necessarily create noise or disturbance. Human beings often adapt quickly to the familiar sounds of companions nearby, allowing sleep to occur even when others remain present. Anthropological descriptions of hunter-gatherer camps frequently mention how the arrangement of sleeping spaces reflects social relationships within the group. Families may rest close to one another, with children lying near parents or older relatives. Couples often share a space, and extended family members remain nearby. At the same time, the camp itself remains a collective environment where multiple families occupy the same shelter or the same small clearing. The result is a layered pattern of closeness. Immediate family members closest together, with the wider group still within the same general sleeping area. This structure allows both intimacy and community to exist at the same time. Another important detail observed in these communities is the continued activity of the fire through much of the night. In many camps, the fire is maintained for warmth, cooking, and light. Someone may occasionally wake to adjust the embers or add fuel, especially in cooler conditions. These small actions occur quietly and briefly, often without fully waking others nearby. The camp remains mostly silent, yet not entirely still. Subtle movements and quiet sounds continue to circulate through the shared space. Such observations suggest that sleep within these communities is often embedded within a living social environment rather than isolated from it. The presence of others does not necessarily prevent rest. Instead, it becomes part of the background against which sleep takes place. For individuals who have grown up in such environments, the quiet breathing and occasional movement of companions may feel as natural as the sounds of wind or distant animals. The group itself becomes part of the environment in which sleep occurs. While each hunter-gatherer society has its own traditions and variations, the repeated appearance of shared sleeping spaces across different regions suggests that group rest is a common feature of many small-scale human communities. This does not prove that all prehistoric humans slept in exactly the same way, but it supports the broader idea that sleeping near others has deep roots in the social structure of our species. The modern habit of separating sleep into individual rooms may therefore represent a relatively recent development when compared with the long stretch of human history, during which nights were spent within the quiet presence of the group. Anthropologists who have spent long periods living with small-scale communities often describe the evening hours as a slow transition rather than a sudden end to the day. As sunlight fades, activity does not stop all at once. Instead, people gather around a fire or within a sheltered space where the last tasks of the day can be completed. Tools may be repaired, food may be shared, and conversations often continue long after darkness settles over the surrounding landscape. Without artificial lighting, the rhythm of the evening becomes closely tied to the natural limits of firelight and moonlight. Within that circle of dim light, the group remains close together, and the space that held conversation gradually becomes the space where sleep begins. In many of the communities observed by researchers, sleeping arrangements are simple but carefully shaped by social relationships. Mats, skins, or layers of plant material may be spread on the ground to create resting places. Families usually position themselves close together, with children sleeping near their parents or older relatives. Yet even with these small clusters, the entire group remains within the same general shelter or clearing. There may be small gaps between family spaces, but the overall environment is still shared. From the outside, a camp at night may appear quiet and still, yet the presence of many sleepers remains close enough that subtle sounds travel easily across the space. Observers often note that this shared environment does not prevent people from sleeping. Instead, individuals seem to adapt to the familiar presence of others. Quiet breathing, occasional movement, or the shifting of bedding becomes part of the expected background of the night. Over time, these sounds fade into the normal rhythm of sleep. The human mind is capable of filtering repeated and familiar signals, allowing rest to continue even when the surrounding environment is not perfectly silent. For individuals raised in communities where shared sleeping spaces are common, complete silence may actually feel unusual rather than comforting. Another feature frequently described in these camps is the flexible timing of sleep. Not everyone lies down at the same moment. Some members of the group may become tired earlier and settle near the fire, while others remain awake to talk quietly or continue small tasks. Gradually, the camp grows calmer as more people drift into sleep. Even then, the night rarely becomes completely motionless. Someone may wake briefly to adjust their sleeping place, check on a child, or add wood to the fire. These moments usually last only a short time before the person returns to rest. Because different individuals wake at different times, the group maintains a gentle pattern of overlapping awareness throughout the night. The presence of several generations within a camp also contributes to this pattern. Children, adults, and elders often share the same space, and their sleep rhythms can vary. Younger children may move or wake more frequently, while older adults sometimes experience lighter sleep. These natural differences create a quiet flow of small movements and sounds that ripple through the camp. None of these actions require deliberate planning, yet together they maintain a subtle connection between the group and the surrounding environment. Anthropologists sometimes describe these camps as social spaces that remain active even while most people sleep. The activity is not loud or obvious, but it exists in small shifts of awareness that pass from one person to another across the hours of darkness. These observations do not prove that prehistoric people everywhere slept in exactly the same way, but they do illustrate how shared sleeping environments can function in real communities. When several individuals rest within the same space, sleep does not isolate each person completely from the others. Instead, it unfolds within a quiet network of presence, where the rhythms of individual bodies blend into the wider rhythm of the group as the night slowly moves toward morning. Across different parts of the world, ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherer communities have shown a recurring pattern. Nighttime rest often happens within shared social space rather than in strict isolation. The details vary from one community to another, as they always do in human life. Climate, shelter type, family structure, and local customs all shape how camps are arranged. Some groups sleep in huts or simple houses, others in open shelters, and some in spaces that shift with the season. Yet beneath these differences, a broader pattern often remains visible. Sleep tends to stay close to the center of group life rather than being pushed far away from it. This is important because it reminds us that human sleep is always cultural as well as biological. People do not simply lie down wherever the body becomes tired. They sleep in ways shaped by the social world around them. In many small-scale communities, that world includes shared fires, shared shelter, and shared responsibility for children and elders. Under these conditions, sleeping near others is not treated as unusual. It is part of the ordinary structure of life. The camp remains a collective space, even after conversation fades and most bodies grow still. One reason ethnographic evidence matters so much is that it helps us avoid projecting modern assumptions too far into the past. In industrial societies, many people grow up with the idea that proper sleep belongs in a separate bedroom, on a private bed, behind a closed door. Silence, privacy, and separation are often treated as normal conditions for rest. But when anthropologists describe camps where several family members sleep in the same hut, or where multiple households remain within hearing distance of one another through the night, it becomes clear that modern sleep architecture is not the only human pattern. It is one historical arrangement among many, and a recent one when measured against the much longer story of our species. Ethnographic accounts also help reveal the practical logic behind shared sleep. In camps where firelight is limited and shelters are simple, staying near others allows warmth, caregiving, and awareness to remain concentrated rather than scattered. Parents can respond quickly to children. Older adults remain within reach of the group, brief awakenings during the night. Whether caused by a child, a sound outside, or the fading of the fire, can be absorbed by the group without turning into a crisis for one isolated individual. The social environment softens the risks of the night by distributing them across several people. This does not mean that hunter-gatherer communities are frozen images of prehistoric life. They live in the present, not the past, and their cultures have changed over time just like all human cultures. Anthropologists are careful about this point. No living group can be treated as a perfect model of ancient humanity. Still, these communities remain valuable because they show how human sleep can function under conditions closer to those of deep history than modern urban life does. They demonstrate that sleeping near others is not strange, primitive, or disorganized. It is a coherent human response to a world in which life is shared, space is shared, and the night is faced together. Seen from this perspective, the title of the video begins to feel less surprising. If most of human history unfolded in small interdependent groups, in flexible camps, in simple shelters, and under skies without artificial light, then sleeping in groups may not have been an exception that needed explaining away. It may have been the quiet default of human life for thousands upon thousands of nights. The unusual arrangement may be the one many modern people now take for granted, a single person sleeping alone in a separate room, behind solid walls, in conditions of warmth, privacy, and silence that the deeper past rarely offered. Unlike written history, which records events through documents and stories, the deep past of humanity must often be reconstructed from physical traces left in the ground. Archaeologists search for these traces carefully, examining layers of soil, fragments of tools, and the remains of ancient camps to understand how people once lived. Direct evidence of sleep is rare because sleeping itself leaves few permanent marks. A person lying down on the ground for a night may leave little behind once time, weather, and later human activity have reshaped the landscape. Yet even without clear impressions of bodies or bedding, archaeologists can still learn something about nighttime life by studying how ancient living spaces were organized. One of the most consistent features discovered at prehistoric habitation sites is the presence of hearths. These fireplaces appear in archaeological layers dating back hundreds of thousands of years. A hearth usually consists of a concentration of ash, charcoal, burned bones, and stones that were heated repeatedly by fire. When researchers map the position of these hearths within caves or open campsites, they often find that other signs of activity cluster around them. Stone tools, animal bones, and plant remains frequently appear near the same central areas. This pattern suggests that the hearth served as a focal point of daily life. People prepared food there, worked with tools nearby, and likely spent much of their waking time within reach of its warmth and light. If the fire marked the center of the camp during the day, it is reasonable to consider that it may also have shaped how people arranged themselves at night. The warmth of a hearth spreads only a short distance, creating a limited zone where the air remains more comfortable than the surrounding darkness. In caves or rock shelters, this zone may have extended across a small portion of the floor. In open camps, the illuminated area around the fire would have been even smaller. Because warmth and light were concentrated in one place, individuals resting nearby would naturally gather within that shared space. Archaeological studies sometimes reveal repeated patterns in how artifacts are distributed around hearths. Certain areas show evidence of tool production or food preparation, while other spaces remain relatively clear of debris. Some researchers interpret these cleaner areas as places where people may have rested or slept. Although these interpretations cannot be confirmed with complete certainty, the spatial patterns suggest that human camps were organized rather than random. People arranged their activities and resting areas in ways that made practical sense within the limited space available. Another important clue comes from the size of prehistoric shelters themselves. Many caves and rock shelters used by early humans are not large enough to contain widely separated sleeping areas for multiple individuals. Instead, they form compact spaces where the group would have remained physically close. Even in larger caves, the most comfortable zones, those protected from wind or dripping water, tend to be limited. Archaeologists studying these sites often find evidence that activity concentrated in particular areas that offered the best protection and warmth. If a group occupied such a shelter for several nights or seasons, the most favorable spaces would likely have been shared rather than divided into isolated sections. Outside caves, temporary shelters made from organic materials rarely survive long enough to appear clearly in the archaeological record. However, traces of post holes, compacted soil, or clusters of artifacts sometimes reveal where such structures once stood. These structures were usually small and built for mobility rather than permanence. Their limited size suggests that the people using them would have rested within close proximity to one another, simply because space was constrained. In this way, archaeology does not provide a direct photograph of how prehistoric humans slept. Instead, it offers a series of spatial clues: hearths at the center of camps, activity areas arranged around them, and shelters that favor shared space rather than separation. When these clues are considered together with what we know about human biology and social life, they suggest that the night likely unfolded within the same communal spaces where daytime life had already taken place. When archaeologists examine prehistoric camps, they often pay close attention to patterns rather than individual objects. A single stone tool or fragment of bone tells only a small part of the story. What matters more is how many such objects appear together, where they are located, and how their positions repeat across layers of time. Over decades of excavation in different regions, researchers have noticed that many ancient habitation sites show a similar organization. Hearths appear near the center of activity, while the surrounding ground contains traces of cooking, tool-making, and other daily tasks. Beyond these areas, the evidence becomes thinner. suggesting that the most important activities took place close to the fire. This arrangement offers a quiet hint about how the night may have unfolded. If most of the tools and food remains clustered near the hearth, it suggests that people spent long hours in that same space. During daylight, the fire would provide warmth and a place to cook. After sunset, it would continue to serve as the only reliable source of light. Because the illuminated area remained small, people working, talking, or resting after dark would likely remain within that circle. The camp therefore did not expand outward into separate corners during the night. Instead, the shared centre of activity probably remained the shared centre of rest as well. Archaeologists also look for areas within sites that appear relatively undisturbed. In some prehistoric caves and shelters, certain parts of the floor contain fewer sharp stone fragments and fewer broken bones. These cleaner zones are sometimes interpreted as places where people sat or rested. Although it is impossible to confirm exactly how they were used, the absence of heavy tool debris suggests that these spaces were reserved for quieter activities. If members of a group rested there during the evening, those same areas could naturally have become sleeping places once the fire burned low and conversation faded. Another piece of indirect evidence comes from the repeated use of the same locations across long stretches of time. Many prehistoric sites show multiple layers of occupation, where groups return to the same cave or sheltered area again and again. When archaeologists compare these layers, they sometimes find hearths positioned in similar locations across different periods. This repetition suggests that certain parts of a shelter offered the most comfortable conditions for warmth, protection from wind, or access to light. If the hearth remained in roughly the same place across generations, the surrounding resting areas may also have remained consistent. People returning to a familiar shelter might naturally gather and sleep in the same zones where earlier groups had done so. In open-air sites, the clues are more subtle but still meaningful. Campsites sometimes reveal clusters of stone tools, animal bones, and burned material that form circular or oval patterns around a central hearth. These patterns suggest that people gathered around the fire while working, eating, and talking. If night arrived while the group remained in that position, the transition into sleep may have happened without major rearrangement. Individuals could simply lie down within the same circle where they had spent the evening. The fire would continue to glow at the center, and the group would remain close enough to share warmth and awareness of the surrounding environment. Archaeology cannot show us exactly where each person lay or how close their bodies were to one another. The materials that would have marked sleeping places, plant bedding, animal skins, woven mats usually disappear long before archaeologists arrive. Yet the spatial structure of ancient camps provides a strong suggestion. Human groups organized their living spaces around shared resources such as fire, shelter, and tools. These shared spaces would naturally draw people together at the end of the day, just as they had during the hours of activity. In this way, the archaeological record quietly supports the possibility that the night did not scatter people into isolation. Instead, it likely gathered them even more closely within the small protected zones that their camps created against the darkness beyond. One of the quiet strengths of archaeology is its ability to reveal patterns that repeat across distant places and long stretches of time. When researchers compare habitation sites from different regions, they sometimes notice similarities in how human groups organized the limited space available to them. These similarities appear in caves used by early humans in Europe, in rock shelters across Africa and Asia, and in open camps discovered in many landscapes. Although each location reflects its own environment and cultural traditions, certain structural features return again and again. Among the most consistent of these features is the central position of fire within the living space. Fire created warmth, light, and a place for cooking, but it also shaped how people gathered within the shelter. When archaeologists reconstruct the layout of these camps, they often find that activity areas form rings or clusters around the hearth. Tools were sharpened there, food was prepared nearby, and fragments of daily life accumulated in the same general zone. Beyond that circle, the density of artifacts usually declines, suggesting that people spent less time in the darker outer areas of the shelter. This repeated pattern helps researchers imagine how the space may have felt during the evening. As daylight disappeared, the visible world would shrink toward the glowing center of the camp. The hearth became the anchor of the night, and everything important remained close to it. When conversation slowed and bodies grew tired, the simplest way to rest was often to remain within that same shared space. Individuals could lie down near the fire, perhaps on layers of plant material or animal skins, while still staying close to the warmth and the quiet presence of others. In many caves and rock shelters, the physical layout of the space also encourages this interpretation. The most comfortable parts of a shelter are often limited to areas protected from wind, dripping water, or falling rock. Archaeological excavations frequently reveal that human activity concentrated in these favorable zones rather than spreading evenly across the entire floor. If the group gathered there during the day, it is likely that they remained there at night as well. Moving away from the warmest and most protected part of the shelter would have offered little advantage once darkness covered the landscape outside. Even when shelters were large enough to allow some separation between individuals, the practical benefits of remaining near the hearth may have outweighed the desire for distance. Firelight could help people orient themselves if they woke during the night. The warmth could reduce the chill of early morning hours. The presence of companions nearby could provide reassurance in an environment where the outside world remained only partly visible. These small advantages may have quietly shaped how people arranged themselves within the limited space available. Archaeologists sometimes describe this arrangement as a form of spatial organization that reflects the social life of the group. The camp was not divided into many isolated compartments. Instead, it formed a shared living area where different activities happened in close proximity. Cooking, toolmaking, storytelling, and rest could all occur within overlapping zones surrounding the hearth. This arrangement suggests that separation between individuals was not always the primary goal of camp design. Rather, the shelter functioned as a collective environment that balanced warmth, safety, and cooperation. Although archaeology cannot show us the exact position of each sleeping person, the evidence repeatedly points toward camps structured around shared space rather than strict division. The hearth stands at the center, and human activity gathers around it in rings of light, warmth, and conversation. When the night deepens and the fire burns lower, those same rings of space likely become the resting places of the group. In this way, the archaeological record does not directly display sleeping bodies, but it quietly reveals the stage upon which their sleep probably unfolded. A small circle of light in the darkness, where the presence of others remained close even after voices faded and the camp slowly settled into silence. When modern people imagine sleep, it is often pictured as a single, continuous block of unconscious rest. A person lies down, falls asleep, and remains unaware of the world until morning. Yet when scientists began studying human sleep more carefully, they discovered that the reality is more complex. The night is not a single, uninterrupted state. Instead, sleep unfolds in cycles that repeat several times before dawn. Within each cycle, the body moves gradually through lighter and deeper stages before returning again toward lighter sleep. This repeating pattern means that the brain regularly approaches moments when waking becomes easier, even if the sleeper does not fully remember these brief transitions. In environments where several people sleep close together, these natural rhythms can interact in subtle ways. Each individual follows their own internal cycle, which is rarely synchronized perfectly with the cycles of others nearby. One person may enter deeper sleep while another begins to move toward a lighter stage. A third person may briefly wake, shift position, or open their eyes for a moment before drifting back into rest. When several sleepers share the same space, these small variations create a pattern in which complete unconsciousness rarely occurs across the entire group at the same time. Instead, awareness moves gently from one person to another across the hours of the night. Researchers who have observed sleep patterns in communities without strict artificial lighting sometimes notice similar rhythms. The night may contain quiet periods when most people sleep deeply, followed by moments when one or two individuals stir briefly. Someone might add wood to a fire, check on a child, or simply adjust their position before lying still again. These actions are usually short and quiet, lasting only long enough to address the immediate need. Yet each moment of wakefulness reconnects the group briefly to the surrounding environment before sleep returns again. This pattern does not require a planned system of night watch. In many cases, it emerges naturally from the way human sleep works. Because individuals cycle through different sleep stages at slightly different times, the group never becomes perfectly synchronized in its unconsciousness. Even a small camp with several members may therefore maintain a gentle rotation of awareness throughout the night. At one moment, an elder may be lightly awake, listening to the sounds beyond the shelter. Later, a parent may stir when a child shifts nearby. At another time, someone closest to the fire may wake briefly to adjust the embers. These small awakenings form a quiet rhythm that spreads across the group without disturbing everyone at once. Anthropologists sometimes describe this phenomenon as a form of distributed vigilance. Rather than placing the responsibility for watching the night on a single individual, awareness moves naturally through the group as different sleepers pass through lighter stages of rest. Each person contributes a small portion of alertness during brief moments when their sleep becomes lighter. Over many hours, these contributions overlap in a way that keeps the group loosely connected to its surroundings. This does not mean that prehistoric people were constantly alert or unable to rest deeply. On the contrary, deeper stages of sleep would still occur regularly, allowing the body to recover from the physical work of the day. The important point is that deep sleep did not necessarily happen for everyone at the same moment. The natural diversity of sleep rhythms within a group created a balance between rest and awareness. In the long environments where humans evolved, this balance may have allowed groups to sleep with greater confidence, knowing that someone in the camp was likely to be lightly aware of the night at any given time. As the night moves forward, the rhythm of sleep within a group rarely remains perfectly still. Even in modern homes, careful measurements of sleep show that people wake briefly many times during the night, often without remembering these moments in the morning. The sleeper may shift position, adjust their blanket, or open their eyes for a few seconds before returning to rest. These brief awakenings are a normal part of human sleep and do not usually disturb the deeper cycles that follow. In a shared sleeping environment, however, these moments can have subtle effects that reach beyond the individual. When several people rest close together, a small movement by one person can gently influence the awareness of another. The quiet sound of someone turning over, a soft voice checking on a child, or the faint crackle of a fire being adjusted may briefly draw the attention of someone nearby. Often the second person does not fully wake. Instead, their brain registers the change and returns to sleep once the sound fades. Over time, these small exchanges create a web of light awareness passing through the group. Anthropologists observing communities that live without strict electrical lighting have sometimes described nights that unfold in quiet layers of rest and wakefulness. After the fire burns lower and most members of the camp lie down, the group may remain mostly silent for long periods. Yet the silence is rarely absolute. A person may rise for a moment to add wood to the embers. Another may wake briefly because a child shifts nearby. An elder might sit quietly for a short time before lying down again. These movements are usually calm and unhurried. They do not break the overall stillness of the camp, but they do mean that the night contains occasional points of wakefulness scattered among the sleepers. In this way, the group forms a subtle pattern that spreads attention across the dark hours. One person's short awakening may happen shortly after another has already returned to sleep. Later in the night, someone else may stir for a different reason. Because these moments occur at different times, the group avoids falling into a state where every individual remains equally unaware of the environment for long periods. The effect is not dramatic. It is gentle and quiet, emerging from ordinary sleep behavior rather than deliberate planning. The presence of fire often plays a role in maintaining this rhythm. Even a carefully prepared hearth rarely burns with the same strength throughout the entire night. Embers settle, flames weaken, and fuel gradually disappears. Someone resting nearby may wake naturally when the air grows cooler or when the firelight changes. By adding a small piece of wood or shifting the embers, that person briefly reconnects the camp with the surrounding darkness before returning to sleep. These actions are simple and familiar in many communities that rely on fire as a constant source of warmth and light. Over many generations, such rhythms may have blended into the ordinary experience of nighttime life. The group did not need to appoint guards or enforce strict schedules to remain connected to its environment. Instead, the natural patterns of human sleep and small practical tasks created moments of awareness that moved gently from one individual to another. Each person's brief attention helped maintain the stability of the whole group. From this perspective, sleeping in groups offered more than warmth or companionship. It created a quiet network of presence that extended through the night. Even when most bodies were still and breathing slowly in sleep, the camp remained loosely awake in scattered moments, ready to notice changes in the darkness beyond the firelight. Across many nights and many generations, These quiet patterns of waking and sleeping may have formed a rhythm that early human groups experienced without needing to describe it in words. No single person remained responsible for watching the darkness every hour until morning. Instead, awareness moved gently through the camp as different individuals passed through lighter stages of sleep or briefly woke for ordinary reasons. The result was not constant vigilance, but something softer and more flexible. The group as a whole remained loosely connected to its surroundings, while still allowing each individual to rest deeply for portions of the night. This kind of distributed awareness is not unique to humans. In several social animal species, researchers have observed similar patterns in which not all individuals sleep deeply at the same time. Some members of the group remain lightly alert while others rest, and the balance shifts gradually across the night. Humans, however, add an additional layer of complexity through culture and social relationships. The reasons someone might wake briefly in a human camp extend beyond simple biological cycles. A parent may respond to a child's movement. Someone may adjust a covering or reposition bedding. Another person may notice the fire dimming and add a small piece of wood. Each of these actions is small, yet together they contribute to maintaining contact between the group and the environment around it. When these moments occur in a shared space, they become part of the collective life of the night. One person's brief movement may be heard by another without fully waking them. A quiet voice may reassure a child before fading again into silence. The fire may brighten for a moment as fresh fuel catches, sending a short glow across the sleeping area. None of these events require the entire group to wake. Instead, they pass through the camp like small ripples that quickly settle back into stillness. The overall impression remains calm and quiet, yet the group never becomes completely disconnected from the world outside the shelter. This pattern may have offered practical advantages in environments where humans shared the landscape with other animals and changing weather conditions. A distant sound might draw the attention of one lightly sleeping individual before it reached the rest of the group. If the sound proved harmless, the moment would fade and sleep would continue. If something unusual appeared closer to the camp, a single alert person could wake others nearby. In this way, the responsibility of responding to the environment did not rest on one continuous guard. It moved naturally through the group, as each person's sleep cycle shifted across the hours of darkness. The structure of human communities may have reinforced this pattern even further. Camps often included individuals of different ages, and age influences how people sleep. Children may move or wake frequently. Adults may pass through predictable cycles of deep rest, and older individuals sometimes experience lighter sleep with more frequent awakenings. These natural differences create variety within the group's nighttime rhythm. At almost any moment, someone may be closer to wakefulness than the others. Without planning it deliberately, the group maintains a rotating layer of awareness shaped by biology and daily life. Over thousands of years, this quiet exchange between sleep and awareness may have been one of the subtle advantages of resting together. No single person needed to remain alert through the entire night, yet the camp itself never became fully unaware of its surroundings. The presence of others created a living pattern in which rest and attention flowed gently from one sleeper to another, allowing the group to face the long darkness, not as isolated individuals but as a connected community. When the sun set in prehistoric landscapes, the day did not end immediately. The work of gathering food, travelling across the land, and preparing tools slowed, but the social life of the group often continued into the evening. Firelight created a small circle where people could remain active after darkness fell. Within that circle, the pace of life changed. The urgent tasks of the day were mostly finished, and the group could settle into quieter forms of interaction. These evening hours may have played an important role in shaping how humans experience both community and sleep. Anthropologists studying small-scale societies frequently describe the time after sunset as a period when conversation becomes more reflective. People share stories, discuss events of the day, and pass along knowledge about animals, landscapes, and traditions. Children often listen closely during these moments, absorbing information that helps them understand the world around them. The fire provides enough light for faces to be seen and voices to be heard, but the darkness beyond the camp encourages people to remain close together. This creates an atmosphere where social bonds can be strengthened through quiet interaction. Over long stretches of human history, such gatherings may have been one of the main ways knowledge moved between generations. Stories told beside the fire could carry information about past events, seasonal changes, or the behavior of animals. These stories did not need to be formal lessons. They could appear as memories, advice, or reflections shared among companions. Children listening nearby would slowly learn the patterns of the world they would eventually inherit. In this way, the evening camp became more than a place of rest. It became a place where human culture continued to grow. The presence of this social life in the evening may have influenced how sleep arrived within the group. Instead of individuals leaving the gathering and retreating into separate spaces, people often remained where they already were. The same place where stories were told and food was shared gradually became the place where bodies settled into rest. Some members of the group might lie down earlier, while others continued quiet conversation for a little longer. Over time, voices softened, movements slowed, and the camp shifted gently from wakefulness into sleep. Because everyone remained within the same general space, this transition could happen without dramatic change. The group did not scatter into distant corners of the landscape. Instead, it slowly became quieter while staying together. The fire itself helped shape this process. As flames lowered and embers glowed softly, the environment naturally encouraged calmness. Bright light that stimulates the eyes during the day disappeared, replaced by a dim glow that allowed the body to relax. In modern environments filled with electric light, this transition can be delayed for many hours. In prehistoric settings, the fading of firelight may have signaled to the body that it was time to rest. Yet the fire rarely went completely dark. Embers often continued glowing through the night, providing just enough light to keep the camp visible. Within that faint illumination, the presence of others remained clear. Sleeping bodies lay close enough to hear breathing or the quiet shifting of bedding. If someone stirred or spoke softly, the sound could travel through the shared space without difficulty. In this way, the social atmosphere of the evening did not disappear entirely when sleep arrived. It transformed into a quieter form. The group remained present, even when most members rested. The habits of gathering, listening, and staying close to one another did not stop at the edge of sleep. They continued in the subtle awareness that surrounded the camp through the night. Over countless evenings in the deep past, this pattern may have repeated again and again. The group gathering beside a fire, sharing the final hours of daylight together, and slowly drifting into sleep without ever fully separating from the presence of one another. As the evening deepened around prehistoric camps, the pace of human activity slowed but did not disappear entirely. The fire still glowed at the center of the group, casting moving shadows across the ground and nearby shelter walls. Within that small circle of light, the last conversations of the day often unfolded. These conversations were rarely hurried. After the physical work of gathering food, traveling across the land, and caring for tools and children, the night allowed people to speak more slowly and reflect on shared experiences. In many small-scale communities studied by anthropologists, the evening remains a time when stories are told, memories are shared, and lessons from the past are quietly repeated. These moments around the fire serve an important function. Human knowledge is not carried only in written records or formal instruction. For most of our species' history, knowledge traveled through spoken language and memory. Stories told in the quiet hours of the night could preserve information about landscapes, seasons, and events that shaped the lives of the group. Children listening nearby might hear these stories many times as they grew, gradually learning how to interpret the world around them. The calm atmosphere of the evening, when attention is not divided by the urgent tasks of the day, may have provided an ideal moment for this form of learning to occur. Because these exchanges happened within the same shared space where people later slept, the transition into rest remained gentle and gradual. No clear boundary separated social life from sleep. Instead, conversation slowly faded as individuals grew tired. Someone might lie down while still listening to voices nearby. Another person might finish speaking softly before settling beside the fire. The camp did not suddenly become silent. It became quieter step by step as each person drifted towards sleep at their own pace. This gradual transition could help explain why group sleeping often felt natural in such environments. When people spend the evening gathered closely together, remaining in that same place to sleep requires little adjustment. The body simply shifts from sitting or reclining beside the fire into a resting position on bedding or plant materials nearby. Families remain close, children remain within reach of caregivers, and companions remain within sight of one another in the fading glow of the embers. The social structure of the group therefore continues smoothly through the first stages of sleep. In many modern settings, the evening unfolds differently. Artificial lighting allows activity to continue long after sunset, and individuals often separate into different rooms before going to bed. Bedrooms become private spaces designed for personal rest. In prehistoric camps, however, the architecture of sleep was far simpler. The camp itself was the living room, the kitchen, the gathering place, and eventually the sleeping area. Because these functions shared the same space, the boundaries between them remained fluid. The fire also contributed to maintaining this shared environment through the night. Even when most people slept, the embers of the hearth often continued glowing softly. This gentle light made the presence of the group visible even in the quietest hours. A person waking briefly could orient themselves within the familiar shapes of the camp without needing to move far or light a new fire. The same circle that had held conversation earlier in the evening remained present as a quiet center of warmth and visibility. Over long stretches of human history, this repeated pattern may have shaped the way people experience both night and community. Evening gatherings around the fire did not lead directly into isolation or separation. Instead, they flowed gradually into shared rest. The social life of the group softened rather than disappearing, and sleep became another phase of that shared life rather than a departure from it. As the fire slowly burned lower and the final conversations of the evening faded, the camp entered its quietest hours. The night did not suddenly transform into complete silence. Instead, the sounds of human activity became softer and less frequent. A final remark might be spoken in a low voice. Someone might shift their bedding slightly closer to the warmth of the embers. A child might murmur briefly before settling again. Gradually, these small movements became less common, and the group moved toward rest together. In this moment, the structure of the camp revealed something important about human life. Sleep did not remove people from the shared space they had occupied during the evening. The same circle around the fire remained the center of the night. Bodies that had been sitting or reclining while listening to stories slowly stretched out on bedding materials nearby. Families remained near one another, and the wider group stayed within the same shelter or clearing. The camp did not divide into isolated rooms or distant sleeping areas. Instead, the social world of the group softened into stillness without disappearing entirely. The fire played a subtle role in guiding this transition. As flames gave way to glowing embers, the quality of light changed. Bright, flickering illumination faded into a dim red glow that barely reached the edges of the camp. This softer light encouraged calmness rather than activity. It allowed people to orient themselves within the space while signaling that the active part of the day had ended. The body, which had followed the natural cycle of daylight and darkness, could respond to these changes by preparing for sleep. In environments without electric light, the fading of the fire often marked the final stage of evening life. Yet the embers rarely disappeared completely. Even when the camp grew quiet, the hearth continued to glow gently through the night. This faint light provided a small but meaningful advantage. If someone woke briefly during the night, the glowing coals offered a reference point in the darkness. The shapes of the shelter, nearby companions, and the surrounding ground could still be faintly recognized. This reduced the disorientation that might come from waking in total darkness. It also reinforced the sense that the group remained present within the same shared space. The arrangement of sleeping bodies within the camp may have reflected the relationships that structured the group's daytime life. Parents lay near children, couples rested beside one another, and extended family members remained nearby. Even when several families shared the same shelter, the distances between individuals were usually small enough that quiet sounds traveled easily. The breathing of others, the occasional rustle of bedding, or the shifting of someone tending the embers could pass through the space without waking everyone at once. These sounds became part of the natural background of the night. Over long stretches of human history, evenings like this would have repeated countless times. A group gathered near the fire after the day's work, shared the final moments of conversation, and gradually settled into sleep without leaving the presence of one another. The night did not separate individuals into private worlds. Instead, It wrapped the group in a shared stillness, where rest and quiet awareness existed side by side. Seen from this perspective, sleeping groups may have grown naturally out of the rhythms of social life itself. The camp that supported cooperation during the day continued to support rest during the night. In the glow of fading embers, the boundaries between social life and sleep softened, allowing the group to drift together into the long darkness before morning returned. For most of human history, sleeping close to others may have felt ordinary, because the physical structure of living spaces encouraged it. Early shelters were rarely divided into separate rooms designed for privacy. Instead, they were often small, simple structures that protected people from wind, rain, or cold, while leaving the interior largely open. In such environments, the boundary between personal and shared space was less rigid than it is in many modern homes. The idea of withdrawing into an individual sleeping room did not yet shape the architecture of daily life. Instead, the group lived and rested within the same general area. This pattern began to change gradually when human societies started building more permanent settlements. Around 10 to 12,000 years ago, in several regions of the world, some communities began shifting from highly mobile hunting and gathering to more stable forms of life connected to farming and animal herding. These changes did not happen everywhere at the same time, and many human groups continued mobile lifestyles long afterward. Yet in places where agriculture developed, people began to build structures designed to remain in one place for longer periods. Houses made from stone, mud, wood, or other durable materials gradually replaced the lighter shelters used in mobile camps. The appearance of permanent houses created new possibilities for how space could be organized inside a dwelling. At first, many early houses were still quite simple. Archaeological sites from early farming communities often reveal single-room structures where cooking, tool work, and sleeping all happened within the same shared area. Families might gather around a hearth inside the house, much as earlier groups had done around fires in outdoor camps. The difference was that the walls of the house provided stronger protection from wind and weather, allowing life to continue inside even during harsher conditions. Within these early homes, sleeping arrangements likely remained close and communal. Several members of a family would share the same room, sometimes resting near the same hearth that warmed the interior. Children slept near parents, and extended family members might occupy nearby houses within the same settlement. The physical distance between sleepers may have been slightly greater than in a small hunting camp, but the basic structure of shared rest still remained. The true transformation of sleeping arrangements developed slowly as houses became more complex. Over many centuries, people began to divide interior spaces into separate areas designed for different purposes. Some sections of a house might be used primarily for cooking or storage, while others became quieter areas reserved for resting. The introduction of interior walls and partitions made it possible to create spaces that were more private than the open rooms of earlier dwellings. Yet, even in these environments, sleeping alone was not immediately common. In many historical societies, families continued to share sleeping spaces for practical reasons such as warmth, safety, and limited housing space. It was only much later, particularly in the last few centuries in some parts of the world, that private bedrooms became widespread as a cultural expectation. This gradual architectural change helps explain why solitary sleep can feel so normal today while remaining historically unusual. The structures we live in now shape how we experience the night. Walls, doors, and separate rooms allow individuals to withdraw from shared space when it is time to sleep. Electric lighting extends activity into the late evening and allows people to move through houses even in darkness. These conditions are very different from the environments that shaped human life for most of our species' existence. When early humans gathered around fires in open camps or simple shelters, their sleeping arrangements were guided by proximity and shared space rather than by architectural separation. The appearance of permanent buildings slowly introduced new ways of organizing nighttime life. Yet the deep history of human sleep remained rooted in a far older pattern, one in which rest occurred within the presence of the group rather than behind the closed door of a private room. As human settlements grew more stable and permanent, the design of living spaces slowly became more complex. Early houses built by farming communities were often small and centered around a shared hearth, much like earlier camps. Over time, however, architectural changes began to alter how people organized the interior of their homes. Instead of a single open space where all daily activities occurred, Some houses gradually developed separate areas for cooking, storage, and rest. These changes did not happen suddenly or uniformly across the world. They appeared gradually, shaped by local traditions, climate, available materials, and the needs of each community. Even when houses began to include more defined spaces, sleeping arrangements often remained communal for long periods of time. Historical records from many early societies show that entire families frequently slept in the same room. Parents, children, and sometimes other relatives rested together near a central hearth or shared bedding area. In colder regions, this arrangement helped conserve warmth inside the house. In other places, the limited size of dwellings made separate sleeping rooms impractical. The idea that each individual would have their own private sleeping space was far from universal in these early settlements. As populations increased and villages developed into larger towns, houses sometimes expanded in size. Additional rooms could be added, and interior partitions allowed families to divide the space more clearly. These architectural developments made it possible for some members of a household to sleep in different areas of the same structure. Yet even in these cases, separation was often partial, rather than complete. A house might contain 2 or 3 rooms rather than one, but each room could still hold multiple sleepers. Privacy remained limited, and the sounds and presence of others continued to shape the nighttime environment. Cultural traditions also influenced how sleeping spaces were organized. In many societies, sleeping arrangements reflected family relationships and social roles. Younger children might sleep near their parents, while older children shared space with siblings or grandparents. Guests or extended relatives might also be included within the same household during certain seasons or gatherings. These patterns demonstrate that the meaning of sleep was not only biological but also social. Where people rested at night often reflected the structure of the family and the wider community. The gradual movement toward more private sleeping spaces accelerated in certain parts of the world during the last several centuries. Improvements in building materials, increased wealth in some societies, and new cultural ideas about personal privacy encouraged the development of separate bedrooms. Urban houses and later modern homes were often designed with multiple rooms dedicated specifically to sleep. Each member of a household might eventually have their own bed, and sometimes their own room. This arrangement allowed individuals to withdraw more completely from shared nighttime environments. Yet this transformation is relatively recent when viewed against the full length of human history. For thousands of years before these architectural changes became common, most people lived in homes where sleeping occurred within shared spaces. Even after houses developed separate rooms, many families continued communal sleeping practices because they remained practical and familiar. The shift towards solitary sleep did not erase older patterns overnight. Instead, it emerged slowly, layered on top of a much older tradition in which rest occurred near others. Seen from this perspective, modern bedrooms represent a specific historical stage rather than a universal human condition. Walls, doors, and separate sleeping rooms reshape how people experience the night, but they do not erase the deeper social tendencies that developed when human life unfolded within smaller shared environments. The long history of communal sleep remains visible beneath these changes, reminding us that the private sleeping room is a relatively recent addition to the story of how humans rest. The movement from shared sleeping spaces to private bedrooms was not a single invention. It was the result of many slow changes in architecture, economy, family structure, and cultural values. In much of the ancient and medieval world, even settled populations continued to sleep in ways that would still feel collective by modern standards. Houses might be permanent, but space inside them remained limited. Heating was often uneven, and the warmest place in a home was usually near the hearth or where bodies gathered together. Beds existed in many societies, but they were not always individual or private in the modern sense. Several family members could still sleep in the same room, and sometimes in the same bed or on shared bedding surfaces. What changed over time was not simply where the body lay down, but what people expected sleep to be. In many traditional settings, sleep remained part of household life rather than a fully separate zone. The room where people rested might also be a place for storage, conversation, work, or childcare. Night did not fully divide one function of life from another. Children might still be close to adults, elders might sleep nearby, guests could be incorporated into the same indoor space. In these households, privacy existed in limited and flexible ways. not through the sharp architectural separation that later became common. As some societies became wealthier and more urban, the meaning of domestic space began to shift. Houses in certain regions gradually grew larger, and the number of rooms increased. Interior walls did more than divide activities. They created a new relationship between the person and the household. A room could now belong not only to a function, but to a smaller unit within the family, or even to a single individual. Over time, the bedroom emerged as a more clearly defined space for sleep, rest, and withdrawal. With that change came a different idea of what nighttime should feel like. Quieter, more controlled, and more private. Yet even this transition moved unevenly. In many places, separate bedrooms remained rare for ordinary families until quite recently. Crowded housing, economic limits, and long-standing customs meant that shared sleeping continued well into the modern era. In some cultures, communal sleeping within the household is still normal today, especially among children, elders, and multi-generational families. This is important because it reminds us that the modern ideal of sleeping alone is not only historically recent, but also culturally specific. It is one arrangement among many, not the final or natural destination of human sleep. The rise of the private bedroom also changed how people thought about the self. When sleep moves behind a closed door, it becomes easier to imagine rest as an individual experience rather than a social one. The sounds of other people fade. The rhythms of the household become more distant. The body lies down in a space arranged for personal comfort rather than collective survival. That arrangement can feel entirely normal now because architecture, technology, and habit have made it familiar. But from the longer view of human history, it represents a remarkable departure from the conditions under which human sleep first took shape. For most of our species past, the night did not gather people into separate private rooms. It gathered them into a common space defined by fire, shelter, kinship, and mutual dependence. The later emergence of walls, partitions, and bedrooms did not erase that deeper history. It only covered it with a newer layer. Beneath the silence of the modern bedroom remains a much older human pattern, formed across countless generations in which sleep happened near others, inside the same shared world, while darkness settled beyond the edge of the fire. In the modern world, many people experience sleep in conditions that would have been unfamiliar to most of our ancestors. Bedrooms are often designed to be quiet, private, and separate from the activity of the household. Walls block outside noise, windows can be closed against the weather, and artificial lighting allows people to move through their homes even in complete darkness. Beds provide soft surfaces raised above the ground, and blankets or climate control systems maintain comfortable temperatures throughout the night. These features create an environment where sleep can occur in relative isolation from both the outside world and the people nearby. Yet when this environment is placed beside the long history of human life, it becomes clear that such conditions are historically recent. For most of our species past, sleep unfolded in places where the boundary between the individual and the surrounding environment was much thinner. Camps, huts, and early houses allowed outside sounds and changing temperatures to enter more easily. Firelight rather than electric light defined the visible world after sunset. Most importantly, people often rested within hearing distance of others rather than behind the closed door of a private room. This shift in sleeping environments does not mean that modern arrangements are unnatural or harmful. Human beings are highly adaptable, and the body can learn to sleep under many different conditions. However, the contrast between modern bedrooms and the environments in which human sleep originally developed can be striking. In earlier settings, the presence of other people nearby may have been one of the most stable features of the night. Families, companions, and children remained close within the same shelter or camp. The sounds of breathing, movement, and quiet conversation formed a background that signaled the continued presence of the group. In modern bedrooms, those signals are often absent. A person may lie down in a room that is completely silent except for distant household noises or the hum of machines. For many individuals, this quiet environment feels comfortable, but others notice that unfamiliar silence can sometimes make sleep feel less secure, especially in new or unfamiliar places. Sleep researchers have occasionally observed that the human brain can remain more alert when sleeping in unfamiliar environments. This phenomenon is sometimes described as a form of partial vigilance, where one side of the brain remains slightly more responsive to sound during the first night in a new location. While the details of this response are still studied, the general idea reflects an important point. human sleep retains a connection to the surrounding environment even when the body is resting. The mind continues to monitor the world quietly, ready to respond if necessary. In earlier human settings, that environment often included other people resting nearby. The group itself formed part of the background that the brain learned to recognize as familiar and safe. When individuals slept within the same space night after night, the quiet sounds of companions could become expected signals rather than disturbances. Over time, these signals might help the mind settle more easily into deeper stages of rest because the environment remained consistent and socially familiar. Modern sleep environments sometimes replace these signals with architectural separation. Walls, doors, and separate bedrooms reduce the sensory presence of others during the night. This arrangement offers privacy and quiet, which many people value. At the same time, it also represents a different relationship between the individual sleeper and the surrounding social world. Instead of resting within the presence of the group, many modern sleepers withdraw into personal spaces designed primarily for individual comfort. The long history of communal sleep therefore provides a reminder that human rest has not always been solitary. For thousands of generations, the night was experienced within shared spaces where families and companions remained close. The quiet of the modern bedroom may feel natural today, but it stands on top of a much older pattern in which the sounds and presence of others were a familiar part of falling asleep. In modern societies, the design of homes and cities has gradually reshaped the experience of night. Electric lighting extends activity far beyond sunset, allowing people to read, work, and move through their homes long after darkness falls outside. Heating and cooling systems maintain stable indoor temperatures regardless of the season. Thick walls and sealed windows reduce the sounds of wind, animals, and distant movement. These technological changes have created environments where the body can rest in conditions that are far more controlled than those faced by earlier human communities. Within these settings, sleep often becomes an individual event rather than a shared one. A person may close the door of a bedroom, turn off the lights, and remain alone in silence until morning. From a practical perspective, this arrangement offers many advantages. Privacy can make rest easier, especially when daily schedules differ among members of a household. Separate rooms reduce disturbances caused by movement or noise. Personal beds allow individuals to adjust bedding and temperature according to their own comfort. For many people, these features improve the quality of sleep and provide a sense of personal space that earlier generations rarely experienced. Yet these same changes also alter the sensory landscape in which sleep occurs. When individuals sleep alone in isolated rooms, the body receives fewer signals from other people nearby. The quiet sounds that once filled shared camps or houses, breathing, shifting, or low conversation fading into the night, are often replaced by near silence. In urban environments, those sounds may be replaced by distant traffic or mechanical noise rather than the presence of familiar companions. This transformation highlights how deeply architecture and technology influence human experience. The biological processes of sleep remain largely the same as they were thousands of years ago, but the environment surrounding those processes have changed dramatically. The brain still cycles through stages of rest, still responds to unexpected sounds, and still monitors the surrounding environment even when consciousness fades. What has shifted is the context in which those biological patterns unfold. Instead of resting within a shared social space, many modern sleepers rest within carefully controlled personal environments. Anthropologists sometimes describe this change as part of a broader movement toward individualization in modern life. Activities that were once shared, work, meals, leisure, and sleep, have gradually moved into more private settings in some societies. Bedrooms, in particular, represent one of the most personal spaces within a modern home. They allow individuals to withdraw from the household and experience the night in relative isolation. While this arrangement can provide comfort and independence, it also differs greatly from the social environments in which human sleep likely evolved. This contrast becomes most visible when people sleep in unfamiliar places. Travelers, campers, or individuals spending the night in new environments sometimes notice that sleep feels lighter or more alert during the first night. The brain may remain sensitive to unfamiliar sounds or changes in the environment until it learns that the new setting is safe. Although the reasons for this response are still being studied, it reflects the broader principle that human sleep remains connected to context. The body does not completely disconnect from the world when rest begins. Instead, it quietly continues to evaluate its surroundings, even while recovering from the day's activity. For most of human history, those surroundings included other members of the group resting nearby. In the modern world, the presence of companions during sleep has become more optional rather than necessary. Families may still share sleeping spaces in some cultures or stages of life, but architecture now allows individuals to choose separation if they prefer it. The modern bedroom therefore represents both a comfort and a historical shift. It offers privacy and control, yet it also marks a departure from the communal environments where human sleep first developed across the long history of our species. The contrast between modern sleep and the deeper past of human life is not simply a difference in comfort or technology. It is also a difference in how the night is experienced socially. In earlier environments, the night gathered people into shared spaces where warmth, conversation, and awareness overlapped. In modern homes, the night often disperses individuals into separate rooms where each person rests alone. This transformation did not occur because the human body changed dramatically. Instead, the structures surrounding the body changed. Walls, doors, beds, lighting, and climate control gradually reshape the environment in which sleep takes place. Over time, these changes altered expectations about what sleep should feel like. Silence, privacy, and separation became the new standard in many societies. Yet the biological foundations of sleep still carry traces of older conditions. The human brain continues to monitor sound and movement during rest. People may still wake briefly during the night without remembering it later. Caregivers often remain sensitive to the small sounds made by children even while sleeping. These patterns suggest that the body has not fully separated sleep from the surrounding environment. Instead, it remains quietly attentive to signals that might matter for safety or care. In earlier human settings, many of those signals came from the presence of other people nearby. The breathing of companions, the movement of a child, or the sound of someone adjusting the fire all formed part of the background in which sleep occurred. When those familiar signals were present, the environment may have felt stable and predictable. The group itself provided reassurance that the night could be faced collectively. In modern settings, that social background is often replaced by architectural separation. A person may lie down in a quiet room with the door closed, separated from the sounds and movements of others in the household. For many people, this arrangement feels comfortable because it offers privacy and control. At the same time, it represents a relatively recent stage in the long history of human rest. The idea that sleep should happen alone, in silence, and behind walls has developed gradually through changes in housing, technology, and cultural expectations. Recognizing this historical shift does not mean that modern sleeping habits are wrong or unnatural. Human beings have always adapted their behavior to new environments and new tools. The ability to build warm houses, create comfortable beds, and design quiet rooms reflects remarkable creativity. These innovations improve comfort and protect people from many of the hardships faced by earlier generations. Yet understanding the deeper past of human sleep can still offer perspective. It reminds us that the experience of resting near others was once a central feature of life for countless generations. The night was not always divided into separate private spaces. Instead, it often unfolded within the same shared environment where daily life occurred. Families gathered near a fire, stories passed quietly between voices, and the group slowly drifted into sleep together as darkness settled around them. The modern bedroom stands at the end of a long historical path that began in much simpler places. Beneath the quiet walls and soft beds of today's homes lies a much older pattern in which sleep was intertwined with companionship, caregiving, and shared awareness. For most of human history, the night did not belong to isolated individuals. It belonged to the group. When we step back and look across the long history of our species, a quiet pattern begins to emerge. For tens of thousands of years, human life unfolded in small communities where survival depended on cooperation. People traveled together, gathered food together, shared knowledge across generations, and raised children within a network of relatives and companions. In such environments, the boundary between the individual and the group was often softer than it is in many modern societies. The group itself provided warmth, protection, and continuity in a world where the landscape could change quickly and unpredictably. Within that setting, sleep was never completely separate from the rest of social life. It happened within the same shared space that held the activities of the day. Fires that warmed the evening gathering continued glowing through the night. Children remained near their caregivers. Elders rested within hearing distance of the younger members of the group. The same network of relationships that supported survival during daylight remained present during the quiet hours of rest. When people drifted into sleep, they did so within the presence of others rather than apart from them. From a biological perspective, this arrangement aligns with several features of human sleep. The brain does not fully disconnect from the surrounding environment during rest. Instead, it cycles through stages of lighter and deeper sleep while maintaining some sensitivity to sound and movement. In shared environments, these patterns allow awareness to circulate across several individuals rather than remaining concentrated in one person. A parent may wake when a child moves. Someone resting near the fire may notice when the embers fade. Another individual may respond to a sound beyond the shelter before returning to sleep. These small moments of attention pass quietly through the group, creating a balance between rest and awareness that supports both recovery and safety. The long period of human childhood adds another layer to this pattern. Infants and young children require care throughout the night, and their needs naturally draw adults closer. Shared sleeping spaces allow caregivers to respond quickly without disrupting the entire group. At the same time, the presence of children helps maintain the social connections that define human communities. Night becomes not only a time of rest, but also a continuation of caregiving and protection within the group. Archaeological evidence, anthropological observations, and biological research together suggest that sleep has long been embedded in the social fabric of human life. Camps organized around hearths, shelters shared by families, and communities structured around cooperation all point toward the same possibility, that rest often occurred within the presence of others. The night was not experienced as a solitary retreat, but as a quieter phase of the same collective existence that shaped the day. Modern life has introduced new forms of comfort and privacy that allow individuals to sleep alone if they choose. Bedrooms, insulated buildings, and artificial lighting have changed the physical environment of the night in profound ways. These changes have made solitary sleep easier and more common in many parts of the world. Yet when viewed against the vast timeline of human history, this arrangement represents a relatively recent development. The deeper story of our species suggests that sleep was once woven more tightly into the shared life of the group. Understanding this long history does not require us to abandon the comforts of modern living. Instead, it offers a broader perspective on how human behavior develops over time. The way we sleep today reflects the environments we have built around ourselves. Just as earlier generations shaped their habits around the fires, shelters, and companions that surrounded them, beneath the quiet walls of modern bedrooms, the memory of that older pattern still remains a reminder that for most of human history, the night was faced together rather than alone. Across the long arc of human history, the way people slept was shaped less by individual preference and more by the conditions of life around them. Climate, shelter, family structure, and the presence of fire all influenced where and how rest occurred. Yet beneath these changing conditions, one feature remained remarkably consistent. Humans lived as members of small social groups whose survival depended on cooperation. Within those groups, the night was not an interruption of social life, but a quieter continuation of it. The fire that gathered people together in the evening remained a point of warmth and orientation as darkness deepened. Families rested near one another, children remained close to caregivers, and the group settled gradually into stillness without fully separating into private spaces. Over thousands of generations, these repeated experiences may have shaped the expectations that accompany human sleep. The body learned to rest in environments where the presence of others formed part of the background of the night. Familiar breathing, quiet movement, and occasional whispers near the fire signaled that the group remained intact. These signals did not require conscious attention, yet they created a stable context in which rest could unfold. Even as individuals drifted through cycles of lighter and deeper sleep, the social environment remained quietly present. Someone might wake briefly to tend the fire. Another might respond to the soft sounds of a child stirring nearby. These small acts of awareness moved gently through the camp, maintaining a connection between the sleepers and the surrounding world. The gradual changes brought by settled life, architecture, and modern technology altered this pattern in significant ways. Permanent houses allowed sleeping spaces to become more defined. Interior walls divided households into separate rooms, beds lifted the body from the ground, and electric light extended the day far beyond sunset. Over time, these innovations reshaped how people experienced both privacy and rest. In many parts of the world today, sleep takes place in individual rooms designed to protect the sleeper from noise, temperature changes, and outside disturbance. This environment provides comfort and control that earlier generations rarely experienced. Yet it also transforms the relationship between the sleeper and the social world around them. Instead of resting within the presence of the group, individuals often withdraw into personal spaces where the sounds of others are distant or absent. Recognizing this difference can deepen our understanding of human sleep without suggesting that one arrangement is better than another. The history of sleep is not a simple story of progress or loss. It is a story of adaptation. As human environments changed, sleeping arrangements changed as well. People adjusted their habits to match new forms of shelter, new technologies, and new cultural expectations. What remains constant is the remarkable flexibility of the human species. The same biological body that once slept near a fire in a shared shelter can also sleep in a modern bedroom surrounded by quiet walls and soft bedding. Understanding the older patterns simply reminds us that the human experience of night has not always been solitary. For most of our past, darkness gathered people together rather than separating them. Sleep unfolded within the same circle of relationships that supported life during the day. Families, companions, and children rested within reach of one another, while the fire dimmed and the stars moved slowly across the sky. The quiet hours before dawn belonged to the group as much as the daylight hours did. Seen from this long perspective, the modern bedroom becomes one chapter in a much larger story. Behind the silence of the present lies a memory written across thousands of generations, a memory of nights when humans faced the darkness not as isolated individuals, but as members of a small circle of warmth, awareness, and shared life. Across the long story of our species, the night has always been a moment of transition. The bright activity of the day slowly fades, the surrounding landscape grows quieter, and the body prepares for rest. Yet for most of human history, this transition did not lead people into isolation. It led them back toward one another. Families gathered near the warmth of a fire, companions rested within the same shelter, and the quiet presence of others became part of the environment in which sleep unfolded. The darkness outside the camp could still hold uncertainty, but inside that shared circle of warmth and familiar voices, the group created a small island of stability in the wider landscape. Over countless generations, this pattern repeated again and again. Humans moved across forests, plains, and river valleys, carrying with them the same essential structure of life: cooperation during the day and shared rest at night. Firelight marked the center of the camp. Children slept near caregivers, elders remained within reach of younger members, and the group gradually drifted into sleep together as the night deepened. The biological rhythms of the body, cycles of lighter and deeper sleep, brief awakenings, and quiet awareness of sound blended naturally with this social environment. Awareness passed gently from one sleeper to another while the group rested, creating a balance between recovery and attention to the world beyond the firelight. In the modern world, the environment of sleep has changed dramatically. Walls, bedrooms, electric light, and comfortable beds allow people to rest in ways that would have been difficult for earlier generations to imagine. Privacy and quiet have become common features of nighttime life in many societies. These developments reflect the creativity and adaptability of human culture. Our species has always reshaped its surroundings, building new forms of shelter and comfort as knowledge and technology grow. Yet the deeper history of human sleep still offers something valuable to remember. It reminds us that the body we carry today was shaped across thousands of generations in environments where life was shared more closely than it often is now. Sleep once unfolded within the quiet presence of family and companions rather than behind the closed door of a private room. The sounds of breathing, shifting bodies, and glowing embers formed part of the background of the night. Even while resting, humans remained connected to one another and to the world around them. Understanding this long history does not require anyone to abandon modern comforts or change how they sleep today. Instead, it offers a broader perspective on what it means to be human. Our species has always adapted to new environments while carrying traces of older ones within our biology and behavior. The modern bedroom represents one moment in that ongoing process of change. Beneath its quiet walls lies the memory of countless earlier nights when sleep happened within the warmth of a group gathered together against the darkness. The educational message in this history is simple but meaningful. Human beings have always survived not as isolated individuals but as members of communities. Cooperation, care for children, shared knowledge, and mutual protection allowed our ancestors to endure environments far more uncertain than those most people experience today. The habit of resting near one another was one small reflection of that deeper truth. When we look back at the long journey of our species, it becomes clear that many of the strengths that carried humans through the past, cooperation, empathy, and shared responsibility, remain just as important in the present. The night that once gathered small groups around a fire now unfolds in cities, homes, and quiet bedrooms around the world. Yet the deeper question still lingers softly beneath the silence of modern sleep. After so many thousands of years spent resting beside one another, what traces of that ancient human closeness might still remain within the way we experience the night today?